Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. Recently, I sat down with Clint Chavarria, also known as Classic Liberal on X. This will be a show about philosophy. Those of you who are not very interested in philosophy or who think that I should just talk about reforming the schools and it's intellectualizing too much to delve into the foundation of the ideas behind the progressive model of education, may not want to listen, but I hope that you do. I hope you give it a chance, because I don't think people fighting so hard to reform the schools understand what they're fighting against, never mind what they're fighting for. And only when you really understand the philosophical underpinnings of what's going on, who's behind this and why, and what it is they actually believe, even if they're not conscious of that belief system, that worldview, if you don't understand that, you're not really going to be able to effectively fight it. And you certainly won't know what you're defending or how to rebuild what ought to be, because there really isn't much to defend right now. It's fully progressive. So if you don't like that, you need to know why you don't like it, beyond boys in the girls' bathroom or porn in the library. So who is my guest? Who is Clint Chavarria? He is also known as Classic Liberal on X. He posts there about classic liberalism, Scottish common sense realism, and anti-communism. He's a patriot, he's a family man, and I hope I can call him friend, because I really respect what he's doing, and I learned a lot from this conversation. So I hope you will as well. Without further ado, Clint Chavarria. Hey, Clint, how are you today?
Good, Deb. Thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of yours.
Oh, well, thank you. Likewise. For those of you who are not familiar with Clint, I have followed Clint on X. He's Classic Liberal on X for quite some time. And while I don't comment a lot, I do share a lot of his work. Really recently became very interested in the work that you've done around defining for people postmodernism versus something called post-liberalism. And then in that sweet spot, I won't say it's in between, but the one we don't talk about, which is classic liberalism of our founders, of America. The missing piece for me, as I've been observing this train wreck of a cultural shift my whole life, I just would notice this doesn't seem like what was intended, but I can't put it into words. And I think you've done a great job. So I want this to just be a free-flowing conversation, audience. So, as you're watching, this is not super structured, but I think there's some important issues. So I'll open it with this. What do you see as the big gap in people's understanding about what's happening right now? When you see people defining things on X or elsewhere, and it's this, it's that, what are they missing? Because I think I was missing it, and I want to know what you think.
So what I've come to kind of understand, what the entire tension, and people have to agree with me. I'm going to probably use broad generalization of terms, but when we say leftism or wokeism, and even post liberalism is just another version of that. But leftism, broadly speaking, is that what most people don't understand is that it has a very fundamental view of, and it's going to be, everybody needs to wrap their heads around this, about existence itself. And so everybody thinks it's about social justice, or on the post-liberal right, for example, it's about, conservatism, it's about this, and no, it's actually about the two competing worldviews about how existence itself is arranged. And so this kind of gets into people's brains a little bit, because it's philosophical woo-woo, right, as you like to call it. And but it's actually a little bit more simpler than most people actually realize. So what happens is, when you have a particular world about existence, and because the founders talked about this all the time, everybody needs to realize the founders talked about metaphysics all the time. amongst themselves, right? And there, you'll see little little parts of it in their writings to each other. But they talked about, reality and existence and science. They were big time into science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so when you have a fundamental understanding about existence, everything flows from that, including your governance models, right? So and how you determine how society should be arranged. Okay, so that's a kind of a long-winded way to say, when you look at classic liberalism, for example, and so when we talk about metaphysics, basically we're just talking about, when I say metaphysics, I'm just talking about existence. How is existence arranged, or right? And so for us, for most Americans, it's you know, it is that there's an objective existence, like, the table in front of you, the computer you're watching right now, the people in front of you, like with you, like, are objectively there. They're objectively real. They exist. You exist. And that human beings, us, did not create existence. We are not, it was created independently of us. Right. And whether or not you're a Christian or an atheist, you have, whether it's God or nature, however you want to look at it, it doesn't matter. We're not the ones who created it. That's the primary thing. And therefore, we are also, we're not some divine creators, right? So we are flawed and we are limited. So now, when you have an objective reality that we did not create, and we are flawed, limited, and when we realize we're flawed and limited, and we're self-aware of this, our governance structures are designed to accommodate or mitigate our flaws and our limitations, right? So that's the foundational. There's more to it, natural rights and stuff like that you come with, but the foundational bottom, right, of classic liberalism is constructed around that.
So this would then be the idea that human nature, for lack of a better term, or a default position that is very mixed. It's neither good nor bad. There's capacity for both.
Or
There's
both, yeah,
free will. All the things that's a real thing.
yeah,
That's a real thing. And I mean, I feel like I have to put it in those simple terms, because what I find is a lot of people walk the earth taking for granted that everyone agrees with that statement that I just made, that human nature is a thing, or that their free will is a thing, that we make choices. Some of us make good choices, bad choices. Maybe in the single life, we make both, that ultimately we, our lives and our destinies are a function of the sum of our choices. And I meet a lot of people who think, well, doesn't everybody think that way? It's sort of like the people go, doesn't everyone have a inner monologue? And what I hear you saying is, no, no, in fact,
right.
there are lots and lots of
Well,
people who don't think that
well,
way.
watch this. I'm not going to even go to the woke side. I'm just going to give a clear demonstration of what you're talking about. So when we realize we're flawed beings, right? Um, so this is the easiest one. So when you realize soon enough to survive, you shouldn't indiscriminately take from one another, right? So if I'm taking from you and you're taking from me, and like life and resources, and like we keep taking from each other, one of us is not going to survive eventually. Okay. So then what happens? You start to say, okay, I don't like my stuff being taken. So I'm assuming that another human being, even if I don't like them, might believe the same thing. They might be self-aware that they also understand, potentially, that they don't like their stuff taken either. So then maybe we can come across each other as like, hey, I don't like my stuff. I have a crazy idea. I don't like my stuff being taken, or my life, and you probably don't either. What do you think about not doing that to each other? Right. So there's this implicit agreement, right? That happens, right? And then now you start talking about trading and other things that are peaceful solutions to acquiring resources, right? So now, okay, you have okay, so now we've agreed to say, hey, okay, we're not gonna. What happens if somebody, we don't agree? It's like, okay, our societies, we've all agreed, like, this tribe and that tribe, we've got maybe 50 people, 25 on each side have agreed to not take each other's stuff. And they say, okay, what happens when somebody does? Okay, well, let's put some rule. Let's hash out some rules for what happens. Okay, and so to your point, the people who do not agree with that world vision, we call criminals, because they take from you because they believe that they don't care. They have a different worldview that says, no, I could take your stuff. I don't. Who says that's your stuff? I could take it whenever I want. There's this narcissistic, self-serving capacity in humans. It's native. It's a natural. It's just part of being a human being. They just have not gotten to the point where they've rationalized it to not do that. Right. That's not in their everyone's best interest, including theirs. They just don't care. Okay. And that can be a natural disposition, but it can also be taught. So it can be also sociopathic, right? You can have psychopaths that just don't understand. But then you have sociopaths that they can be taught, but they choose not to, that they prefer to be self-serving, right? So that's a perfect example of people just not agreeing. Criminals are a prime example of people who don't agree with
That's right.
our arrangement. And the left, wokeness is, we'll talk about it in a minute, it's not just that they don't agree. They have an entire architecture built on not agreeing with that, like on like how they want to flip almost everything on its head about that, right? And so now we can talk about real quick. So what does the left, broadly speaking, believe? So it's the opposite. It's the opposite. That existence is subjective. So in this essence, man is now creator of existence, right? And people don't realize that this is happening. Like, how can anybody believe that? I was like, look, they believe. It's really easy. Let me put it this way. We call it faith for a reason. There is no neutral third party telling us, right, whether or not what we view as subjective or objective. We just have to have faith in one or the other in some form of existence, right? So that's kind of what they're working off of, right? So now man is creator, right? He's since everything is subjective, like we're interpreting existence in front of us and we're reconstructing in our own minds, okay? And so what people don't realize that this also comes from, it's not atheist. It's actually its own it's its own religion. It's called pantheism, and or theosophy, however you want to call it, right? But
Right.
it's just another religious. It's just as everybody believes. Christians believe in, and Jews believe in God, right? Like these people believe in man is God, like man is creator. So then it gets worse because the first question everybody will ask, okay, well, if I'm creator of my own existence, how do we have a shared reality? How is it that we all see the same chair, the same trees, or the same dogs, right? It's because so they have this thing called it's called social constructivism, but it's a collective. What they believe is that all of our minds, right? Since we're all human, are collectively we're connected interconsciously, right? We have this collective consciousness, and so then we all fight, kind of in a way, fight about how reality should be constructed. And I'm serious, like I'm not making this up. This is you can, whether it be, you can look at the intellectual stack, whether Descartes or Kant, or as you go through Hegel and Marx, they all believe the same thing. It's all based off that stuff. They'll tell you themselves that that's kind of how they're looking at the world. So then what happens next is, and this is Hegel, Marx's predecessor in particular, but Marx too, is okay. So if existence is subjective to the will of man, and it's socially constructed by society, well, therefore, it means that if we can get just enough people, everybody, to believe this exact thing that I'm talking about, that like you need, because Deb, you and I believe in an objective reality. That's the more people you have a believe, because they believe what we believe is also subjective. Okay, that we need in order to, and the reason there's more of us, there's more people who believe in objective reality than there are subjective reality, which is why we have an objective world. And so, or what we consider objective world. So their goal of the left is to replace our belief in objective reality with a subjective one, right? So they have to do something with us, right? Because if there's too many of us, their subjective existence, you can't actually create this utopia if too many people like us are around saying, no, that's wrong. You can't do that, right? So, and that's the goal. So that leads them to say, okay, since humans create existence, we can create a perfect man, a perfect society where nobody lies or cheats or steals or kills or does any manipulation or anything like that. We just got to but we got to do something with the people who think man is flawed and limited, which are classic liberals and conservatives, broadly speaking, right? So that's the whole that is what you're dealing with, a replacement, this 300-year replacement of our belief systems with objective reality and objective realism, is what I like to call it, and a subjective social constructivist view
Right.
of the world.
And
So
I think as I'm listening to you speak, I keep, thoughts going through my mind are, who the hell is we? So in other words, whenever you hear groups of people, whether they be professors or political activists or, any even subgroup, activist group or whatever, talking about we and we and we. And I think, not only do they have to replace those of us who see objective reality, A is A, right?
yeah,
They have to, it's a never ending struggle
yep,
because they have to narrow down all the different we's
yep,
to be one version of that subjective reality, which in that case would not be subjective anymore, would it? I mean, it'll be
right,
subjective in
dude.
that it doesn't guarantee. It,
Yeah,
it would, in other words, it would not be it will not be objective in the sense that somebody did construct it. But who gets to be the someone
yeah.
is, I can tell you, going to be decided by objective criteria of who's bigger, stronger, has more money, more ruthless, more willing to kill, and all the things that we learn from history, which, by the way, take us right back to where we started with human nature.
Yeah, well, which is crazy, right? Because as you're explaining that, and without getting too technical, buzzy, right? This goes to their okay. So everything you're talking about, they have to actually work. They have to work on how to pitch what you just said in a way that is might allow people to actually believe that it's possible. And this is how the left, and this is what probably drives a lot of people watching your channel, drives people crazy. How can they hold two hypocritical positions at the same time? How can they believe in a subjective world but use objective means, right, to accomplish that, right? Well, it's kind of weird to say this. They look at those because they look at everything as subjective as part of this undifferentiated all. Objective reality and subjective reality are to them what I like they call it's the same. They're the same. They're the same thing. There's no they're like it's different. It's called differences without distinctions, meaning they look different, but they're think of it like a pole. Like you have a stick, and you got North Pole, South Pole of a stick or a magnet, whatever you want to call it. But it's that those poles are part of a single stick, right? And so that's how they look at it. They can hold both positions at the same time, and they can move between them at the same time, depending on what you attack them on. Like you say, no, what about object? Oh no, it's like they move between the Mott and the Bailey, but for
I
that,
just
right?
can't shake the feeling that it is an elaborate scam.
Yeah,
In other words, that even going back to the philosophers who came up with this idea, if I look at the time in which they lived and who they were competing with and so forth, and just like today, really wasn't all that different, but they didn't get paid for publishing. But this idea of, if I want to make a name for myself and I want people to read what I'm writing and I want to, stand out and have a legacy, I have to say something unique. I have to say something different. I have to, not only that, if you're the type of person who wants a legacy, or like, in other words, you want people to notice you, or you want the world to be different than it is, then you are, to a certain degree, probably diagnosably a sociopath in and of
yeah,
yourself. So the
absolutely.
whole thing feels to me very, very much like, and if I look at the individual lives of the individual people involved, I am, feeling on solid ground here, like an elaborate con of how do I come up with a way that's as bloodless as possible for as long as possible so that I'm personally not at risk and people I care about are personally not at risk. And I can possibly result in not only having a legacy, but I can actually get rich along the way, get very, very powerful along the way. My personal offspring can do the same, while everybody else will do my bidding with minimal effort on my part because they'll want to. I'm going to convince them to voluntarily commit suicide.
So this is crazy. I'm glad you're talking about this. So this is what okay. All right. So if we take historically, let's just take
And I'm
as the
talking about intellectual
yeah,
and
well,
spiritual suicide, by the way, but maybe
yeah,
literal, but
yeah.
just for the YouTube people scanning this, and I might still get this, demonetized because I said the S word, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about cultural. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So check this out. So as okay. So there's two components to this. First is the actual philosophy, the architecture of the belief. When you have a subjective existence and it's socially constructed, logically leads to figuring out how to have your ideas dominate over somebody else's ideas, right? So
Duh.
yeah, so there's and to be honest, of all of whether it be Descartes, Hegel is pretty much the kind of the architect of that. He's kind of the guy who kind of starts trying to think about how to, and Marx is his protege, right, so to speak, of how do we go about pretty much bulldozing everybody else's beliefs in objective reality with the Hegel, this social constructive worldview. But think about, so this is what everybody else needs to think about. Okay, so if you had a choice, if you were an oligarchic cartel, the Roman Empire is falling, and you're all these aristocratic families hanging around, what kind of religion is better for you to have in order to maintain your oligarchic control over society? Is it Protestant Christianity, and maybe Orthodox, where there's this decentralized, things are starting to spread out away from now people can start their own things. There's more competition. And then of course that the Protestant thing led into free markets, right? Like there's this growth of less of a mercantile and more of this competitive ecosystem happening, and you're slowly losing what you were. So to me, when I look at leftism, broadly speaking, all it is what they're doing is deifying oligarchy, because that's the best. It's pantheistic religion, but it's the best one for an oligarchy
Of
to
course.
use, right? Because
Yes.
now you don't know, if you're a parishioner of this faith, right? And even if you don't know it, you're worshiping the state,
Right.
right? Or whatever the corporate milieu is, and you don't know that you're part of this church, right? You just participate in it, right? And
I am reminded, genius man here, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
yeah,
He talks so much about this, about how the sheep, as he calls them, the so-called freemen, they thought they were walking around going, we're free, right? They're serfs. They're literal serfs. And yet the notion of speaking against the elect, whether it be the church or the king and his court, was, oh my God, that's treason. You would never do that. And here he is from the 19th century, Yankee American work ethic. I'm free. He works in a factory. He's, whatever. He's got his own stuff. And he's looking at these people like they're human livestock.
yeah,
And he's writing in the 1880s. He's writing about this. And I'm sitting here in the 2020s and seeing actual people with much better education. These people are at least illiterate. That's their excuses. We can't read and we have to believe what the people who can read tell us. Now we have people who are at least functionally literate. Okay.
yeah,
Soon to be maybe not literate, and when you try to explain what you just said, your belief system, college student who claims to be against the rich and the powerful and all this and that, is actually perfectly suited
yeah.
to prop them up and give them loads of power over you, to where you're basically their pet as long as they feel like keeping you.
As long as they
And
feel it, yeah.
and they just no
Yeah.
treason.
What's crazy is that, well, it's not crazy. It has logical consistency, unfortunately. Is that the reason this happened? There's actually There's actually a reason why this happened. Why smart people are prone to this. And I think Thomas Jefferson has a famous quote saying that he'd rather trust a plowman for his common sense of how the world works than any philosopher that he would ever run into, something akin to
That's
that,
right.
right?
That's right.
And so I think Thomas Reid Thomas Reid, we can talk about it in a minute, but Thomas Reid, the Scottish realist, is kind of the key in this conversation. But same thing, he trusts the common man, his common senses over the intellectual. And primarily that's because the reason this happened is because Kant and John Stuart Mill's blocked out Scottish realism from the universities in Europe, and right after the American founding, this happened, right? So they boxed out that, allowed German idealism and French Romanticism to completely take over the education system. So now nobody talks about this what we've been talking about for the last few minutes about who
Right.
here's what these people believe about existence. This is what these people believe about existence. We don't actually talk about it, even because they used to talk to their kids about this all the time. They would talk about existence and reality and all that, and the different like the Scots and the early Americans would do this, and the English too. The early English would talk about existence, and even to their kids, not so high level that they can't understand, but just having conversations about this, right? They'd have studies about existence. And so that was removed. And then I think John Dewey later and some of his other cohorts. So what happens is when you have metaphysical conversations like this, when you have conversations about existence,
Right.
it flies really close to the religious sun, right? Because there's overlap with Christian beliefs, because Christians and Judaism, Christianity and Judaism also believe in an objective existence, right? So they have this
Right.
very common view of the world. And so that is how the progressives were able to kick that out. We're not going to talk about that anymore because
Right.
that's against the establishment clause. So then the very things required to identify subjective social constructive that so you can't identify it. You don't talk about it. So
Right.
therefore you start losing your common senses and your critical thinking about the world, and then they just start slowly through praxis, right?
Right.
Inserting the subjective worldview in there through
Mm-hmm.
praxis. So you're actually, so that thing, was like, hey, let's all collaborate. Let's get in a circle and talk about these things. I say what people don't realize that is social constructivism praxis that they're using. So you're just, it's like, hey, look how well humans collaborate with each other. Look what problem solving you did when we talk about all these things. Well, what they're doing is they're not telling you what's happening underneath that praxis hood, that
Sure.
it's built on top of subjective social constructivism, right? They're not telling you that, right? But you're participating in it, and guess what? You start becoming good at collaborating and working and doing all these things together, and you just kind of, and then they go, well, this is how we help the world, right? They just kind of just start wiggling that in there. It's like,
And it's
hey,
very convenient. They decide for everyone.
yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. It's
Yep.
no, hey, this
They
is
know
this.
best.
Yeah. It's not like here's how some people do it. Here's how we do it. It's none of that. You get no clinical, you don't get a choice,
That's
right?
right.
In it, right? And so all the things that we need, and this is why the intellectual class, especially the higher education, right? Don't is because they their common sense has been completely replaced with praxis, right? So they are basically an NPC. They just come out an NPC, right, of leftism, right, or
Right.
the social constructive worldview, and they don't even have to know it. I think I've used this example of before, where you put a toddler in a Montessori school, they don't know anything about Montessori education. They don't know,
Nor
right?
do they care.
They don't care. They're just, but when they come out of that school, they're a byproduct of Montessori education. It's the
Right.
same thing that's happening. And but by the way, I'm using this argument against the left. It happens everywhere. When I go into your house, if I go to my neighbor's house, I don't take I'm doing classic liberal praxis by not taking their stuff, but I'm not sitting thinking to myself, oh, I'm not. I was like, well, today I'm going to be extra liberal and not take my stuff, my neighbor's stuff, right? So
Or I'm not going to take it because I'm privileged and they're not. Like
right,
these reasons don't enter into your head. I don't take
right.
stuff from rich people either.
Right? You have to actually ask me, "Hey, why don't you, why is it we shouldn't take things from each other?" You actually have to ask that question. Otherwise,
Mhm.
you're just doing praxis. You're doing. You're not
Yep.
learning,
Yep.
right? And so that's why leftist progressives don't know anything. They don't know about Woodrow Wilson. They don't know about Du Bois. They don't know
Right.
about Simone Du Bois unless they go to study for that, right? Like they
Right.
don't know
Exactly.
they don't know they don't know anything about the social gospel or how this got into America in the first place. They don't know any of that. They don't know that those dudes think existence is the intellectual class, like the real ones, not the fake ones, the real ones, like Woodrow Wilson,
Right.
kind of us are asserting that we have kind of a subjective uh, world existence. Like that's how we
Right.
exist. Is this, and that we
Right.
can kind of in a Nietzschean way, we can will to power an ideal America. That's Wilson's thing, right? This, ideal America, right? And that is that is a subjective. So that's a idealist. Well, so leftism is idealism, basically, is what it is. Idealism is what it is, right? That we can will to power this utopia, but only if everyone gets on board with the program, right? And
Right. And historically, does everyone get on board with the program?
no, and that's the
Yeah.
problem, and that's why. So what people need to realize about leftism, and by the way, this goes for post-liberalism too. The Constitution's kind of in the way of that. of it,
That's
it
right.
it does not allow. It's what it's saying is that everybody can have their own belief. For the First Amendment is critical to this, right?
Right.
Cognitive liberty, I think, is what Courtney Turner called it, right? Cognitive liberty, and where like, okay, if you want to believe in a subjective reality, fine, go ahead. I don't care. If you want to be a communist, fine. I don't care. If you want to be a communist or trans or whatever it is you want to be, I don't care. As long as you don't make me, you don't govern me with that stuff. You can't govern
Right.
us. You can believe in it. You can't govern us with it
Exactly.
because you won't let me believe in anything else but that. Right. Versus the opposite, where liberalism says, okay, you can believe in anything you want. You're just restricted in how we're governed. Right. You are limited to what you can do. So that's why I like to call it, because liberalism holds that man is flawed and limited. We have a limited man, right?
Right.
Therefore, we have a limited government. The government just cannot be allowed to do certain things to us. And it's the exact opposite on the left, where they believe in an unlimited potential of man. Therefore, it justifies an unlimited government made of people who believe in unlimited man to make it happen, right? And I
Right.
want people to
Lots and
realize.
lots of force to make utopia.
Yep. Right. Yeah. And people need to understand, take your, whether it be, if you're left of center or right of center, just think about this. What I'm saying here is that take a moment and look at the Democrat, and the Democrats are actually totally doing this, but thinking about inserting an unlimited government, right? It's your worst nightmare, right? And if you're on the left, right, and you're looking at the Republicans, whatever, and you see them if you see them attempting, if I just bring up the concept of an unlimited government,
Right.
you're gonna freak out. But then when I say, well, your side's doing that too. Well, no, what? What do you mean? No, they're not, right? No, we're not. We're not trying to install unlimited government. I said, no, you bro. It's that's happening on your side too, right? So because people don't understand um the how the belief systems are constructed, right?
Sure.
There after a while, if you could, it's easy to pick up on if you just pay attention. If you kind of look at the telltale signs of what they talk about, how they talk about things, you can actually pick up the language, but it takes a little work. It takes some time to do that.
Tell us about that and what we need to know about, why
Yeah.
that's a problem.
So it's very problematic for normie conservatives, uh, where so basically post liberals are in essence a marriage of fascism and Christianity, or conservatism, American conservatism. It's kind of weird to say this. It's the same thing Woodrow Wilson did when he took like this Hegelian or progressive thing, of the kind of the dialectical pantheism type of thing, and married it to liberalism. So it's the same kind of marriage, same kind of esoteric marriage that they like to do, right?
Mhm.
And what happens is that, so just like in the case with Wilson, who's using lots of American sounding terms, about liberty and freedom, and but the minute you realize what he's talking about is Hegelian or pantheistic, then liberty doesn't mean the same thing anymore. So now you're like, it's the same trick. The post liberals are doing the same thing, but they're using conservative words, America first, and even using scripture and to make it look, it's a veneer. It's to make it look like they're conservative, but they're not, because the intellectual, so they are and they aren't. So this is the problem. So Wilson isn't at the same time. This is how this works. Was in liked he liked to push American liberalism, but he really was trying to. It was a facade, right?
Right.
Same thing here. So they're Christian, but what the normies don't understand is that and I'm serious when I say esoteric underpinning of this. Like, I'm talking about heresy, like literal heresy, like Heidegger is into Spinoza, and so is Strauss. These really esoteric pantheists, like which is completely heretical to Scripture, completely, right? As far as I'm aware. Okay, but they hide it, right? So they don't know. So they're kind of abstracting the fascist terms, right? I mean,
Yep.
fascists were doing this before anyway, but putting this American veneer over it. And basically, their primary argument is that Christians and conservatives don't know how to appropriately use power. Well, you know who does? Hegel, like progressives do, right? Like the Hegelian, that pantheistic stack absolutely knows how to use power, quote unquote, appropriately. Which means, so the what people don't realize about fascism is it's the same project. It's just a different means. It's instead of Marx was communist, so he's trying to dissolve the state, but use
Right.
the state at the same time. The fascists are like, no, we'll just use the state, nationalist, right? And so, but it's the same project. They're trying to erode your limiting principles, the limiting principles of the Constitution by imposing, instead of imposing a progressive values, will impose conservative values. And by impose, I literally mean impose, right? Not,
Right.
it's not, right? And so, but you have to listen carefully. So sometimes they'll mention one of their intellectuals, like Carl Schmitt is the most common one. Uh, but if you see Francisco Franco, Pinochet, if you see when he talk about that kind of fascism, uh, um, or so it's kind of moderate. What I call the post liberalism is it's moderate fascism. So if everybody's familiar with the Mott and the Bailey paradigm,
Yeah.
the Mott is the defensible position. I was like, oh no, we're not fascist. No, we're not talking about that, right? Even though we just like we think Carl Schmitt has some good ideas, but we're not going to use all of them. We promise, right? So it's the same thing on the left. We're
Right.
like, no, we're not talking about Kimberly Crenshaw. We like some of those ideas, but we're not doing CRT here, right? It's the same magic trick that they're using. So if you see that, and then so parents who are listening, if you're center right, this is actually pretty easy to get them to say that the Constitution is just a piece of paper, that the Constitution's dead, that Constitution liberalism. So again, if we go back to our earlier conversation, one of the telltale tricks that the post liberals do is they blame liberalism for leftism. They'll tell you, no, the reason we're in this situation is because liberalism, which is incorrect, because liberalism, like as we talked earlier, believes in a objective reality and a flawed and limited human man,
Right.
where leftism is the exact opposite of that. So they don't even align on the base foundational beliefs architecture, right? Like, so because the on the left, right, they believe that existence is subjective, socially constructed, therefore an unlimited man becoming God, right? That's kind of how the left
Sure.
operates, right? So the post liberals are trying to point and say, no, liberalism leads to leftism. I say you can't, because they don't have the same belief structure at
But
all.
people believe that so much, though,
Yeah,
Clint. And
I
I've
know.
seen it on exit. The argument, folks listening, you've probably seen it too. And you might even believe it. You might even be one of the people that's been kind of lured into believing this, that the reason things are so bad is we allowed, think about
Right.
that word, we've
Yeah.
allowed people to live in this way and that way and the other. We've been tolerant, we've been liberal. And do you have the similar reaction I have, where
No,
I'm just like
absolutely. No. You're
incredulous to hear
no.
that?
Yeah, you're spot on, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Or okay, so then okay, so what they do is it's kind of weird for them to do this. Is they'll point to someone like John Stuart Mills or Kant or Hobbes, um, and Rousseau as part of quote unquote the Enlightenment, right? As part of what
Yeah.
contributes to liberalism. And what they don't understand is that those guys are subjectivists, right? So they never talk about uh, the Scottish realists. So for people who don't know where liberalism comes from, it's John Locke's second treatise, which is basically saying no man is God. No man. There's no men are not God. It's basically what he's saying. The king is not God. They can't. Right. That's kind of what he's getting at. So you have John Locke, and then you have the Scottish realists, who kind of I think we might have talked about this, and John Wilson is like a big time. Madison and Wilson are big time into Thomas Reid and the Scottish realists, and they were rejecting all of that subjectivism. So they constructed the Constitution to from the disposition of objective realism. Okay, so the question is, well, why would a post-liberal incorrectly scapegoat liberalism for this?
Right.
Well, the reason for that is because it's a little bit higher. So it's there's a certain splinter of Christianity. Well, no, actually, to be honest, not a splinter. It's the bigger denominations, actually, the Catholics and the Orthodox, for example. And I'm not trying to try a religious war here, but that so Protestant evangelicalism kind of, this is our form of government, or their form of government is this
Yeah.
this decentralized form of government where man is his own gatekeeper of knowledge and morality, right? And really, that's what they're attacking. But they need. My assertion is that they need evangelicals to win against the communists. They need them.
Mm-hmm.
But they also don't like liberalism, right? So somehow we have to get the evangelicals to come off of some of their metaphysics without scapegoating Christianity writ large, evangelical Christianity writ large. So who's the best target for that? Well, it's
Right.
liberalism, right? So let's scapegoat liberalism. This, by the way, this is a very common tactic for leftism to do, right? This is very common. So scapegoating, right? So now they associate in the Enlightenment, which what they're doing is French Romanticism and German idealism. With they're not talking about Scottish realism at all,
That's
right?
right.
But then, so the biggest problem is, so first off, they're throwing shade illegitimately, to be honest, and I think on purpose, because they can't argue Thomas Reid like it's easy to argue against Kant
Yeah.
because he doesn't believe in objective reality. It's easy, and Rousseau. It's easy to hit those guys in the head, right? It's way
Yep.
harder to get against Thomas Reid, who's saying no, there's an objective reality, and humans are bad. So Madison and Wilson are like, okay, look, guys, we all agree in liberalism, like not to take each other's stuff, but you know what? We should accommodate for all kind of the jerk faces out there. Let's arrange the government just in case there's tyrannical jerks out there, and mitigate the tyranny of man. Basically, it's just a flaw, right? It's a flaw, right? So conservatives. So what happens is that, of course, the woke are eroding this. That they've been doing it for 100 years. The progressives, or over 100 years, to be honest, and um, and because we've been boxed out of understanding what common sense is, well, guess who comes to our as saviors? These fascists who happen to have the exact same solution, right? Well, instead of the left using power, let's us use power. And I can't even explain to you, if you ever read Carl Schmitt or Mussolini or those guys, how close they sound to Marx and Lenin and Stalin. Like how, like, it's almost identical. You just got to rearrange some of the
Yeah.
who they're scapegoating, right, to do this against, right? And but it comes from, and this is my biggest thing. If you're conservative, especially if you're Christian, or even if you're Jewish, um, when you bring Schmidt and Strauss and Heidegger and Spinoza, the dude, that is heresy. It's heresy. You shouldn't do, like, why are you following along with a movement that would do that? So pay attention to who they say they talk to, or who they're getting their ideas from. And to be honest, all you need to do is drop in a Facebook thread or on X and just say, hey, the Constitution is the answer, and watch what happens. Okay. When you see a flood of people telling you the Constitution is dead, right? That it's just a piece of paper. It's the problem that creates wokeness. You should know that you are in esoteric fascist land, right? You're
Right.
in the world, you're in their world, right? Because just like the Constitution is in a way of progress, the Constitution is in the way of the struggle, right? The fascist struggle against
Right.
those that hold them down, right? So it's very easy. So like, and I think I should really quickly pinpoint on this, is that, look, Tucker Carlson is going to have who gives you kind of a sneak peek. It's kind of kayfabe, like wrestling kayfabe, right? He's kind of like opening the veil for you a bit. It's like, and showing
Mhm.
you Orban or Daryl Cooper or Doug Wilson or people like this, right? Who are, they're post liberals, right? And so in those conversations, it'll sound like America first. It'll sound like they have the solution that, hey, we need to use conservative power on our own. And it'll sound benign. It'll sound like, yeah, we should totally do that. All you have to do is go either read their books, follow them on their social media platform,
Mhm.
put a post in there in in one of their threads saying, "Hey, the Constitution is the answer." You'll immediately see what the problem is,
That's
right?
right.
So
That's right.
so so here's the thing, and I say, and this is the problem with our whole media, right? And even in schools, right? Where this is, or like I think the school choice thing kind of leads into this, right? Where um, there, think about it. There is no place, very few places where we talk about classic liberalism. It's not happening, right?
Nope.
Right?
Very few.
Or thinking about talking about our what's happening in our world from the perspective of limiting principles. That's not happening. No pundit. Why is that? There like because that's what they're trying to get rid of. That's why there's no voice for that, right? So your left and your right are echo chambers. Your far right. So they're not. Here's the thing. They're not conservative. They don't want to conserve the Constitution. They're not,
Nope.
right? So
People
you need
think
to,
they're conservative because they're socially conservative,
right,
or what I would think more appropriately called traditional, but
right.
it's a weird kind of traditional too. It is truly regressive.
Yeah,
And
it's not post-liberal. They say it's post-liberal. It's actually pre-liberal is what
it
they
is
want to
pre
go
yeah,
back
it's
to.
pre. And
Yeah,
and so, they that's how you hear them. They blame women. They blame feminine. Now, I have plenty of negative things to say about feminism, and I have plenty of negative things to say about certain kinds of ideas that women seem to predominantly hold for some
yeah.
bizarre reason. But there's a difference between identifying that there are trends and identifying certain realities and blaming wholesale the
Same thing
fact that
woke
women
do.
can vote,
Yeah, yeah.
you
It's the
know?
same thing. It's a group. It's
Yeah,
mapping. They always do this. There's this, without getting too deep into it. The whole arrangement of the left, especially when it got to German idealism, is around this Volkish thing. So what they do is they take an identity group and they marry it to ideas.
that's right.
It's immutable. So women, feminism together, right? You can't decouple them. So and this works both in the favor of the feminist communist, right? Say, hey, all women are feminist, right? And it works against in the other way. It's the oppositional look. So now the post liberal are looking at all women as communists as bad,
Well,
all women bad, right? Like
Jews
well,
too.
yeah, right, same
Jews
thing.
too.
Folkish, the same thing. Well,
It's
let's
the
say
same thing. Really, it comes
CRT
down
does
to
it with white
land
people.
and
Yeah,
blood,
yeah,
where you get on the right. And the thing that gets me is the same people who will sit there and say, we need to go back to, to America first. And, America defeated the Nazis. And if it weren't for America, these people would be speaking German, whatever. And then I sit there and I'm like, okay, but let me get this straight. So Churchill was the bad guy and the Nazis were the good guy, but we're the good guys because we beat the good guys. Like
yeah.
it's
The
like it
co
doesn't make any sense.
actually, I hate to say this. It does if you actually know how leftism operates because history to them is subjective,
Right. I keep
okay?
forgetting.
So when you basically what communism is trying to tell you is that existence has always been oppressive existence. So when
Right.
you realize that, then everybody can work toward existence. Never have been like so. Then you'll never have heard about the oppression. We've always been liberated, right? So same thing
Right.
for fascism, right? Where they're saying, well, we've always been in struggle, right? Right. We always that, and so what you and so this inversion of who is good and who is bad, right, happens, right? So the 1619 project is complete same thing, exact same thing,
Yes,
right? So
true.
it's called historicism, right? It's just a subjective application of history to actualize a brand new existence is what it is. You're being manipulated in their sophistry, right?
That's right.
So okay, this is what people need to understand about how the Volkish um thing operates. Okay, so the Mott, I use the Mott and Bailey. Okay, so if you're in the Mott, so let's say they give you, we'll take the anti-Semitism for example. So, well, they'll say, well, it's the Zionists, it's not the Jews, right?
Right. Like
So
there's a difference.
well, that's what I'm trying to say. It's the immutable pairing, Jews, Zionism together, and sometimes they'll do the other way, Jews and communists together. Like they're immutable to that ideological to progress or to fascism, or actually, to be honest, there's a communist version. There's a post-colonial version of this too, right? There's the watermelon communists are the same way, where they
Right.
marry Jews and Zionism together, right? And they're not. We can't decouple it. It's not up to us to decouple this, right? So you're not, so that is when it's not the Jews, it's the Zionists. That's the Mott. But you have the people in the Bailey saying, no, it's the Jews. Definitely
That's
the
right.
Jews. Okay. So just I want to tell people that that it's again the stick. It's the same. It's the same anti-Semitic stick. You just have a moderate version and a radical version on it on the same, and it's still anti-Semitism on the same stick. So what you need to understand is that they don't care if you're in the Mott or the Bailey, just that if you're in one of them, you got to be in one of them, right? So, and it's the same thing for critical race theory. It's not all the white people. It's not all of them, right? It's not all the white people. That's the problem. It's the entrepreneurs and the racists and the fascists, and then of course in the Bailey in the Bailey of critical race theory, no, it's all the white people.
That's
Same
right.
thing. It's the same concept. They're married together.
It's not all the Jews. It's
Right.
just the bad Jews.
Right. Well, that's a Churchill thing, right? He actually, what people don't realize, there's a paper. So and here's the thing, we can't talk about this, right? Because Churchill actually flipped this around. There's a paper he wrote that where the Zionists are the good Jews and the Bolsheviks are the bad Jews. That's kind of what he was getting at,
Mhm.
right? But we can't have this conversation, right? He did that for whatever his own. There's reasons behind all that happening that have nothing to do with Jews, to be honest. Honest, but we can't even have that conversation. So what the fascists did is flip that script. They just flipped it around because it's the same stick. They just flipped it around. Who's bad and who's good,
That's right.
right? So that is how you actually know you're in a Volkish, you're participating or in and around a Volkish cult, is when you can't. What does Zionist mean? What does white supremacy mean? What is right? What is Christian nationalist? Like if you can't pin the name, what something is down, more than likely, or what is feminism? More than likely, you are in and around a Volkish cult split into two, into a moderate pair, a pairing
Yep.
of moderate and
Or
radical.
if you try to bring something up about
Correct.
their generalizations or subjectivism, then they immediately, this is what I've noticed, they immediately go into victim mode of like, why can't I just ask questions? I'm
That's
just
right.
asking questions. You don't want me to talk about things. And then they capitalize also on our observation that there are propagandistic narratives
Yep.
on the left and in the media. And so now everything I don't agree with is a narrative.
Right.
Every bit of history that's inconvenient for me is a narrative.
So this what okay, so there's two attack vectors. It's the same. Okay, so you need Volkish. So the whole thing about um all of leftism is to pit two Volkish people against each other. Okay, so you have the Jews against everybody else, or white people against black people, right? Like you need women
Right.
versus men. So you need two different. It's even better if both ends are also Volkish. It's harder when it's classic liberals, right? Because
Yes.
we're staying outside of that paradigm. But it's better if they get you into either Volkish groups to fight each other.
Yep.
So then what happens, and just people need to understand, is what actually is happening when you do what I call othering, when you're othering your opposition based on their identity group, right? In this Volkish sense, it's an attack on free speech, because now you can't talk about your side or the other side and what they're doing, right? Well, you're using propaganda and you're attacking each other in this way, right? There's like you just don't want us to talk about it. So now it's attack on free speech,
That's
right? So
right.
now they are things are becoming verboten, right?
Well,
What things?
the thing is the same free speech they said got us in trouble.
Right.
The same free speech they want to use government power to limit because the bad people get to talk too. But now their free speech is being infringed upon when they want to
Right.
talk.
Well, that's the whole point. The whole point is to attack free speech, right? And
Gives
and,
me a
and the
headache.
othering. So in order to crumble and erode the limiting principles of free speech, which it does have some. Free speech actually has, like, you typically try to agree not to do slander and libel to people, right? That's kind of part of the agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're trying to erode free speech by using the identity group, because they know this is the most sensitive thing to people is your identity and
Mm-hmm.
what tribe you belong to, what family you belong to. They know this is the wedge issue for everybody, right? So they use the Volkishness in order to create conditions to, first off, you think that Volk is about to attack you and take your freedom, so you're willing to abdicate your limiting principles to stop them at all costs, and that includes not letting them talk or not letting anybody. And when you point out, well, hey, you're being kind of a fascist about it, right? They're like, well, how dare you, right? Like the wound collecting starts happening, right? So the whole
Yep.
thing is designed to sort you. And so normie conservative, center, right of center conservative, you need to understand that the entire thing that they're trying to do is sort you into one of these Volkish groups, whether it be the radical one or it doesn't matter, as long as you're participating. So that's how. So if you can't separate people from ideas, right? If you can't, then they've got you. If you
That's right.
can't, like, if they keep, so, well, here's the thing. As much proof as people can give that the Jews did this or that, dude, I can give you equal amount of data said no, they did not. Here's what the German idealists did. Here's what the fascists did. Here's what the communists did. Here's a weird thing. German idealism, a whole bunch of Lutheran Christians, not Jews, Lutheran Christians. Almost the entire group of German idealists are
That's
Lutheran
right.
Christians, right? And then, are you telling me the Chinese, they're not Jewish, right? Like, it's like all the Russians out there, like when Lenin finally got them, right? Like overwhelmingly Orthodox Christians, right? That he was eradicating, but you know, not Jewish, right? And so their argument falls apart pretty quickly, right? It's just that, so normie right of center or center, yeah, right of center. If you need to be able to decouple, like, I can decouple a communist from the individual, from a woman. I was like, to me, I was like, okay, yeah, you're a woman, but you're a communist, right?
That's right.
That's what you believe, right? If you're a communist feminist, I don't care that you're a woman. I care that you're a communist, right? I could separate those two things, right? I
Right.
don't care that you're a fascist, or no, I do care. I don't care if you're a white dude, right, and a fascist. I care that you're a fascist. Your
Right.
ideas are what causes problem, not your identity group, right?
Right.
So I don't even care if you are actually a traditional Zionist or a Jew, right? But like, if you're, well, actually, it's probably a better example would be an Islamic caliphate, right? So, like, okay, I don't like caliphates, right? Like, I don't want that idea imposed on me, right? Like, I want to
Right.
be able to believe. I don't care that you're Arab. I don't care, right? That doesn't matter to me, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
they seem to miss that whole non-aggression thing that,
yeah, yeah,
most of us are a little bit attached to. It's like you can go be as, hardcore in your identity as you want over there,
right,
meaning not in my space, forced to be in my space. Like classic liberals will look at people behaving in ways they don't approve of or, don't think should be part of the norm of society. And we stay away from those things. We don't teach them to our children. We don't go to those places. We just don't partake. But we don't use force unless that person like forces themselves into our sphere and forces us to accept that sort of repressive tolerance thing.
yeah.
A classical liberal's like, whatever. I don't agree
If
with
you're
you. I think
not
you're whack, but
if you're not infringing on my rights to believe what I want to believe and say what I say, you can do what you want. There are limits to that, obviously, like with kids, right? If you're abusive to your kids,
exactly.
the kids can't defend their own liberty. That's what
That's
parents
what
are
we're
for.
here
And dude,
for.
and here's the thing: if parents are the ones abusing their kids, guess what? The state, because the kids are still citizens of this country, has a moral
That's
obligation to
right.
protect the
Right.
rights of our
And that's
children, right?
very different from your children belong to the community.
That's right,
No, your
absolutely,
children are citizens. Now, and then people say, well, but they're not adults, whatever. And yes, well, we have to protect the children,
yeah,
had to decide when they are fully self governing. And until then, their parents are
absolutely,
stand ins and their parents forfeit that right when they violate their child's civil rights. The presumption
absolutely,
is the parent will be the guardian of their liberty. So that
Well,
precludes
here's
abuse.
the thing. I push that to any adult doctors or whatever psychologists infringing upon our kids to
Yes,
any adult that does that is not they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the state should come in and protect those who can't protect citizens that can't protect themselves, that can't defend their own liberty, right? And so ultimately, what everybody needs to know, what the post-liberal, the moderate fascists, as they're probably considered, is they're trying to enter your home and tell you what you can and can't, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to believe in your own house.
right.
Just like, and so are the communists. Same thing. They're doing the same thing. They're trying to come into your home, the government by the state coming into your home and telling you what is appropriate to do or say or believe.
That's right.
Right. Beyond the limits of government that we as Americans have,
Right.
consent beyond the consent of the governed and what we've established
Right.
as the limiting principles of the
But
Constitution.
it's tempting, isn't it? I mean, you've seen it. You've
Yeah,
seen people get so frustrated with what's going on the
I
left
get it. Yeah,
that they get, pulled in, or they'll see Tucker and they've liked Tucker and they feel like Tucker has been sort of anti-establishment. And then he brings on some of these guests, these post-liberal guests. And the temptation, I think, is to think anybody, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
yeah,
And the people who are speaking out with clarity, because remember, you just said the thing we need to do is clearly say, you're irrelevant and I don't have to listen to you because you're a flat earther. So if somebody comes along and says that half, they ignore the second half of
right.
what comes after it.
You
So they get the
never
part right about you're irrelevant. They just replace it with, and therefore we need to put you in prison.
Right, you're right. Well, it's and in prison, which makes them irrelevant, right? It flips right
Yeah,
back around. Well, it's weird
exactly.
because what Tucker in particular is not doing is telling you, hey, these are post liberals. They're a little bit different than our typical American view of the world. They don't tell you, he's not warning you that this is happening. It's just woven in to conservatism, and it's not American
Well,
conservatism.
worse than that, he'll
Yeah.
say things like, my guest, Daryl Cooper, is the smartest, most honest
Yeah.
historian out there. And you're like watching the show going, okay, so Tucker, you agree with this. And then that makes it hard for someone like me to take Tucker seriously.
Right.
I stopped taking him seriously when he was giving, sort of aid and comfort to Vladimir Putin
Yeah, for
and his
sure.
version of historical events. So, or look how clean the subway is. That is post liberalism on steroids. The
Yep.
subway is cleaner there. Their grocery store is cleaner there. Therefore, what? Therefore, what?
Therefore, give up your your liberty to make it happen. Therefore,
Well, because it
right?
implies the sunk premise in all of this, and I hate to keep
Yeah.
bringing up my debate terms, but there it is. The sunk premise is supermarkets and subways are dirty because of liberalism.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah. So anyway, I like just to tie this in a bow. It's subtle. They're speaking to your conservative heart. Um, but if you believe in American values and virtue, by the way, which is what the left, be it woke or fascist, post-liberal fascist, wanted to erode our virtues of the West.
That's right.
You need to have discernment. You need to be able to decouple. You need to see the telltale signs when they're merging identity groups and ideas, and especially pay attention to who like look around who's saying the Constitution is just a piece of paper, who's throwing shade at liberalism. I'm not saying liberalism is perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's just humans. It's just a governance form for humans. It's not perfect. It's not supposed to be, but it's the best we got. Right. So it's okay to criticize it, but just do it. It has to be authentic. Right. And so anybody telling you to burn the Constitution to ashes and just toss it out in the trash can, that should be a red flag. Tying people and ideas together should be a red flag. Bringing up Schmidt or Strauss or Franco, that should be a red flag. So that you do. Here's the thing: don't participate if you can help it in Volkish. It's very bad. It's just very bad. Like
Well, and
history's proven out.
remember too that the left loves it when you do.
Yeah, well, correct. Well, actually, it's kind of crazy. The left is always creating Volks on demand, women Volk, queer Volk, right? Fat Volk, right? They're always doing this. They're always creating different identity groups to combat for society to combat with, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's completely, and so they're watching the post-liberal fascists just create. I was like, they're like, yeah, like they don't care. They actually prefer that we emulsify our own liberty. That's that's perfect for them. It's like, okay, so as soon as we get rid of the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, like those communists, like, okay, you've done our job for us. We're just going to come in and
That's right.
take over, right? So
Right.
yeah, don't do it. And but besides the fact that othering just is very bad, and don't do that. So
Exactly. Exactly. So the ones who are saying things like, yeah, see, this is why we need to round up everybody and blah, 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 whatever for law and order and, kick these people out and do this to these people. What I think they believe is that unlike the people on what we call the left who know exactly what they're doing, maybe not down to the last foot soldier, but the people at the top sort of know what they're doing and they believe it and they've come up with like a pseudo morality and a pseudo reality. Everything is pseudo for them to
pseudo,
justify it.
yeah,
Whereas what I'm seeing on the other side is like they speak of reality using objective terms. They seem to recognize, at least verbally, that there is such a thing as human nature. The difference is they don't see the other side. It's like they look at human nature as so flawed it needs this big strong government to the only reason people are good is rules. The only reason people are moral is fear of God or fear of prison or something.
yeah,
The only thing that is going to motivate anybody to do the right thing is to have that all powerful government. And when you tell them that's really just a slight variation on what the people on the left are saying, they're like, no, but I recognize reality. And reality is that people are criminals, and people are rapists, and people are this, and people are that. It's like, yes, and most people aren't those things.
yeah,
And you're actually okay with treating everyone like they might be like Minority Report or something.
right,
Like
yeah,
you're okay with mass surveillance. You're okay with, strong police forces and all this kind of stuff. You just are convinced that you're doing it in the service of the good life and of the good and moral behavior.
yeah,
And so therefore it justifies depriving people of all these rights. And they'll look at you straight in the face and be like, so you want everybody to steal each other's
yeah,
stuff?
right,
And you're like, oh my God,
yeah,
I'm talking to a wall.
yeah,
It's so
right,
for me, it's more frustrating than talking to the people who I genuinely think, let's say 5 out of 10 of them are straight up mentally ill. Like
right,
they're missing some key component either because it was never taught to them. They were deprived of these key life lessons in very young childhood, so that it's very easy for them to still believe in this sort of equivalent of Santa Claus in the government. Okay, and at the same time, these people drive me crazy because they will say, "Yes, those are your glasses, and that is a mug, and that is a this, and that is that," like objectively, but then they believe goodness is socially constructed.
yeah. That's actually that's a good way of putting it. So okay, so we have this weird dynamic. And it happens on, okay, it happens on, so the way everybody should look at how I would say leftism, left and right versions of leftism is constructed is that you have a radical end on each end, and then you have moderate. They work together. They always work together. They work together back and forth, and then they work they work with each other, the left and
Right.
the right as well. So where for this constitutional monarchy, right? Right. So if we want to, and so that is grounded in, you could make an argument that a lot of that is grounded in, to them at least, some kind of objective truth. So, but we're going to put a pin in that for a second, right?
Mhm.
Because the biggest disagreement, and this is why the Reformation happened, the biggest disagreement was, and this is why Protestant Christianity came around, is like, no, what they want is a gatekeeper to knowledge and morality. Okay, that's what they want. Right. So humans should be restricted about what they can know, what's appropriate to know, and therefore, because what they're going to know is biblical scripture, therefore they'll have the right morality associated with it. Right.
Right.
Well, they can't. They can't. So, and here's the crazy thing: China does this, right? China restricts what you have access to, what you're allowed to know over in China, right? So it's the same model, right? And then what they have is communist value. The communist
Yeah.
religion is their values, right? That's their morality or whatever, lack thereof, I guess, over there. But there's some Buddhist stuff in there too. So they're not killing each other indiscriminately completely over there. But So that's kind of the dynamic, right? And so that's the biggest disagreement, is that who's the moral gatekeeper, because the constitutional monarchist will say, well, it has to be a central authority,
Sure.
and the Protestants will say, no, everyone's their own individual gatekeeper of what that is, and we all just kind of have to agree to not take each other's stuff. Let's talk this out. So that's the biggest difference. It's decentralized control, right? Because they realize when you centralize authority like that, it doesn't turn out very good. You get crusades and all sorts of crazy things, right? Deadly things. So then what happens? So this is what happens. So people, we're going to a little bit of history here. So you get people like Mussolini and Schmidt. That's Carl Schmidt, and I forgot the guy's name, Strauss. I forgot his first name. And this other guy named Martin Heidegger, who are using Christian. Hegel did this too. A Christian framework, right? So they're presenting you this nice little wrapped bow package that says Christianity on top of it, like, and how awesome it's going to be. And then you look at it, and they're using scripture and language, and how we need to use political power, and people need to understand power, right?
Very Nietzschean.
Yeah, and then very Nietzschean, and then but it only takes you 1 minute to if everyone just looks at what those guys believe, it goes right back to Hegel. It goes right back to esoteric. It goes back to the same esoteric underpinnings. So what's happening is that they're marrying Christian argument for a constitutional or monarchy and with fascism. Because why? Because fascism is very effective on making it work, right? Making a
which is why most
state.
of these communist societies end up becoming, in fact, I would say inevitably become fascistic, because you are not going to get people to voluntarily do what they want you to do. So then you have to bring out the guns.
Right.
And the prisons and the gulags and all that. And now you're not really communist anymore, obviously. You're not a workers' paradise. People don't share ownership of everything. You've got a few people at the tippy top deciding how things are going to go. And if you don't agree, well, bye-bye to you.
Yeah. Well,
how is that not fascism?
Yeah. Well, they also do, and I was just listening to James Lindsay's recent Communism 3.0. They also, the first thing they do is what fascists do is grab all the land, right, for the state, and then all the resources and all the materials. So then they leverage you with it, right?
Right.
Say, hey, right? So you're
going
to do what we say. Yeah.
Sound familiar, America?
Yeah. You're going to do what we say. Yeah. It's these BlackRock buying up farmland, or Bill Gates buying up farmland, right? So
and
you're going to
homes.
Homes. Yeah. You're going to do what we tell you, or you're not going to have the resource. We're going to inconvenience, like at best, we'll inconvenience you, right? At worst, like you said, you're going off to somewhere else, right? If you keep resisting the state. So they immediately grab all the resources. That's what fascists do, and this is kind of what they're trying to the post-liberal right are trying to argue, is when they marry fascism and Christianity. And here's my thing: I don't think there's anywhere in the Bible, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, where it says, hey, you need to go grab all the resources and leverage it against society and force them to believe in your religion. I know it's not very.
But this is the thing too, that I think even those of us who've read the Bible, and I'm like you, at best agnostic, grew up Jewish, etc. But if you read the Old and New Testament, you will find warnings within it.
Right. Don't do that.
It's written right in the book.
Yeah.
People are going to use this book. People are going to come to you and they're going to tell you that they know my will, that they know how to interpret what this is saying for their own purposes. And you need to be on your guard, and you need to be, watch their deeds and not their words. And that, like, there are all kinds of passages. I can't call them to memory. Okay.
Well, I think Exodus is this story. Like, pretty much tells
there they are in the desert. They're worshiping, they're worshiping Baal, and the other thing that's fascinating, and my friends, the Collinses over at Base Camp, Malcolm and Simone Collins have done a show about the different religions and within the religions. So in other words, you mentioned, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about pantheism in a minute, but they talk about the major religions of the world, the three big ones, let's say, okay?
Yeah.
And how over the millennia, they have been used and interpreted by monotheists, polytheists, and then the Gnostics, right? So what we have right now is sort of more on the Gnostic side, I would say, a little bit of polytheism in there as well. But what people have forgotten, too many, is that classic liberalism grew out of monotheism. And
Right.
part of monotheism, people think that monotheism means just, oh, there's only one God. But they're missing the larger point of there's only one God. There's only the one, and you ain't it.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Meaning, like, think about a Jew's hat or kippah. It's like you end here,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and like you're not up here. And a lot of people don't realize that's one of the purposes of it.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, and so the monotheistic tradition drove home that point that you are mortal, you are human, you are not God. Make not of yourself a God. That is
Absolutely.
not you. Shema Yisrael, there is only one God. And that the farther away we get from that, whether you're a believer or not a believer, plenty of believers have left monotheism behind. And they've bought into this kind of like theosophical or more, pantheistic kind of view where somehow God is in that collective consciousness.
Right. Well, we're the
And
mind of God is
yeah, that you,
essentially. Yeah.
that it's impossible to separate the two. God is not above you, and you don't have to believe. For example, you're agnostic. I'm agnostic. You don't have to believe in it. Like a fire and brimstone. I'm in charge, and you are not kind of God. To still have an objective view of reality. I mean, we know Thomas Jefferson was at best a deist, right? And he was still keenly aware that humans did not construct this.
So, yeah, correct. Well, it's interesting. There's a passage by James Wilson I posted where um, I like the argument, even if I'm not a Christian. I really like the argument because what they'll say, and this goes back to us realizing us being self-aware, being a flawed creature. So if you're going to make a good argument for this from a Christian perspective or Jewish perspective, is that God put his good morality good in nature. When I say nature, I mean human nature itself, right? And that I'm capable of realizing my flaws and my limitations, and and therefore maybe thinking that you also can see this as well, starts to build the moral framework for humanity, right?
Right.
And right, and so it's built into our nature by God. If you're going to make that argument, right? And I'm like, okay, that if from a religious perspective, that kind of makes sense. But also, if you're not, and this was what it's really cool that passage says there's a certain set of beliefs, moral beliefs, based on our common senses and the way objective reality is constructed, where you would say God's morality, just human morality that's outside of us. We didn't do it. It's just intrinsic to us. Is available for us to access and know without Scripture, right? So there's this.
Absolutely. Like because
Yeah,
it was there before scripture.
right.
And it doesn't whether you believe that scripture was just people finally wrote down what we already knew and they just have words for it, or you believe that it was actually given by, God came and said, let me help you write it down. Whatever you believe, the idea is that we are not animals. I mean, we are animals biologically, but that we have self-awareness. Now, there may be a self-aware animal out there that I'm, I don't know, maybe apes or something, but
Yeah,
that we know of. We
yeah.
are certainly the most self-aware creature walking the planet, and that can be both good and bad. And that, if you call the good side kind of from God, wherever, the simple point is that the people who are both post-liberal and, postmodern, or uh what are
So the radicals on both
yeah,
sides.
whatever you want to call them, both of those, the ones who are not classically liberal,
Yeah.
okay, those people I actually think they're the real atheists. Like, in a weird way, they're the ones who really don't believe
Yeah,
that
it's
there's
weird.
something bigger than they are. They maybe have constructed this elaborate, it's I'm part of it and, theosophy stuff. But when it comes right down to it, I can't shake the feeling that it's actually a spiritual crisis that has pushed them into the position of like, well, if I can't seem to believe in this higher power for whatever reason, I'll be it.
Yeah,
And then
I'll
I'll
destroy.
sanctify it and
Yeah.
mystify it and make it me feel better about essentially being a monster.
Well, yeah. Well, they'll part of that gives it a divine imperative. When you do that, and this is everybody else needs to understand about progressivism and entirely is that it has a divine imperative to destroy all other faith and reason and replace it with itself. It's entirely
How
constructed
is
to do
that
that.
not literally Satan? Like
Yeah.
in the book. If we're
Or
gonna whether you believe in Satan or not, like if as described, written down by humans, that sounds a whole lot like it.
so I like to bring this up just because this is the most frustrating thing to watch. But like if everybody's not familiar with Simone de Beauvoir, she's like pretty much the kind of the epicenter of modern feminism, Marxist
Oh,
feminism.
Simone de Beauvoir or whatever her name
Yeah,
is. Oh,
Dubois or whatever her name. Yeah,
yeah.
Du, de Beauvoir or whatever you call her.
Yeah.
I think she wrote The Second Sex, right? And then you take W.E.B. Du Bois, who
And
he's
he
a black.
called himself Du Bois,
Yeah,
so
Du Bois. Yeah. So he's black, right? And he's kind of the early. He helped create the NAACP, but he was completely like super German idealist. Like he was wearing their he was putting on their chops,
yep.
right, dressing like them. He was super into German idealism. So what happens is those guys bring to the table. They bring over from there. Uh, French, existentialism and Hegelianism and Marxism, and offer people, offer woman godhood. What's without man?
Right.
Offer black people godhood without white people. Like, what better offer can you give to people if we're
Right.
talking about Satan, right? A Luciferian disposition, then offer no, we can make you gods, right? We
Well,
can,
that's literally what I mean, even
yeah,
in the Faustian play. It's
exactly
like,
right,
what will you trade
yeah,
for this? And they give their soul, and he gets the soul. But I mean, what is your soul at the end of the day? And again, I'm speaking to all people, not just believers,
right,
but it's your individual autonomy and
yeah,
agency
your
and
cognitive
freedom, your
liberty,
liberty.
yeah,
You now
yeah,
belong to someone else. You quite literally, to every cell
yeah.
in your body, you've turned over in exchange for whatever the thing is that you've been promised power, usually power or tangible goods. Services, whatever, your a house, universal basic income, whatever. And one of the reasons that I wanted us to talk about this topic, because the audience might be wondering at this point, like, Deb, okay, this is really interesting. I hope you're thinking that anyway, because
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, but this is really interesting. And I think I'm starting to get, where people are coming from. But what does this have to do with education? Like,
Oh,
why are
no.
you talking about this on an education channel? And so my argument is twofold. One, education, so called as a good or service, which is what unfortunately too many of y'all out there think it is, and it isn't, is has hung out as a carrot for you as one of those things that they're going to give you, right? And that you have a right to have and get from other people, and then they're going to argue over who's going to give it to you better, or they're going to tell you they're better, and it's somehow you're impoverished if you don't have this thing, while at the same time using it. It's literally the perfect vehicle to take their ideas and replace your ideas, if you
That's right.
have any to replace, with theirs, because children are brand new, their brains are they're brand new on the planet, they don't know anything but what the big people tell them, and whatever you're taught, especially at a young age, you're pretty much going to believe. So they dangle the carrot and say you have to have this thing, and then the thing is the actual poison that they're gonna that will get your kids to think the way they think, and that also alienates them from you if you don't agree. So if I'm an objective thinker, my kids go to school and most of the teachers have been taught to be this kind of person, this pantheistic, gnostic, postmodern, whatever it is, utopian, then they have access to my kid 8 hours a day. They start marinating in that. They come home, and I'm quite literally an oppressor or crazy person, or heretic at the very least, in their new religion. So I want you guys in the audience to understand what Clint is talking about here, because I genuinely don't believe you can really fight something, or forget fight, you can really defend what it is you think you want to defend until you identify what that thing is that you're trying to defend. And I'm
There you
not
go.
so sure. I want to talk to you about that right after
Yeah.
this question. I don't think people have really clearly defined that. So I'd like to define that. And number two, um, even after you've defined it, you are not going to have the stones, excuse the expression, to defend it, to do the hard thing that's likely going to take to defend it and your kids in the process, because they're the bearers of it into the future, without a full understanding of the consequences of not defending it. Like, you must, I'm sorry if this is going to be uncomfortable. And I know I sound like a leftist. We're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. But this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. No, you cannot, correct me if I'm wrong. No, you cannot play in their sandbox and work on the margins around them. You can, you could try, but it is very, very hard. And you just need to understand the thing you think is harder is actually not as hard as what you think is easy
That's
or
correct. That's
easier.
absolutely right. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw that back to you now that I've sort of, contextualized this and concretized it in the sort of education institution. Please explain to my audience. Let's define first, like, what is it that we think we're defending or we should be defending, but we haven't really articulated it.
Okay. So here's it again. If we go back to the very beginning of this conversation, what you need to understand is so if you have a belief in an objective reality, right, an existence, and roughly speaking, the same tenets that we're talking about as far as this, because when you kind of set forth that humans are flawed and limited, you kind of have this moral framework where, like, hey, we start to say, hey, we shouldn't be bad to each other, right? We should,
Right.
right. So they're trying to replace that. So this is what you need to understand. When you send your kids to school, the school is constructed itself in praxis to box out, so they cannot identify what they're going to put in there, which is the complete replacement of it. So what you need to understand is, because they want to replace their particular worldview, subjective and socially constructed. Therefore, it automatically puts your child in conflict with you, automatically, when they insert that worldview. So then when your kid goes back home, well, now you don't understand what's going on. Why they are, why can't you start like, why are they arguing with me about what's happening at school? Like, why are they defending this, right? Like, or they're confused, right? Or like, and it's because your world, they've created enough cognitive dissonance in the poor kid, and of course they have all sorts of tools to overcome that, to insert the subjective worldview that automatically puts you in conflict with it. And so you need to understand that the entire school itself is constructed to box all that out and prevent conversations about it, to prevent challenging it, right? When I say conversations about it, I actually just mean clinical conversation. I mean, I'm just talking about, like, hey, these people believe in subjective reality. These people believe in objective. We don't talk about that in schools. Like, there's a reason for that, because if you talked about it, just like here's the thing. When I talked to my 11-year-old about this, and I said, okay, here's what we believe. This is what she immediately looked at me, because I think kids, especially depending on the young, like before, right around middle school and younger, but especially around that age. Now, high school's a little bit tougher. They work in objective reality. I mean, I know they have an imagination, but really, they really know if you do something stupid, you're going to fall and hurt yourself, right? They know, they work in objective reality. They're not thinking about that. They're just operating in reality. And then when
Right.
you say, well, we believe this, and these people believe in Santa Claus, they're like, Dad, that's crazy. I'm like, yes, I know, it's crazy. Right? They know. It's just like, I had this conversation with my 11-year-old, and I'm gonna have more conversations with her about it, but like, it's to inoculate her when she goes in there. I'm just like, here's how you identify, when you see these concepts come in, here's how they're hiding them, here's what they're trying to do. Here's what you need to do if you want to either navigate it or fight back against it, or even say, hey, my parents aren't comfortable with that. Can you talk to my parents, like, or bring it to me? And then the biggest thing, I think, Deb, is, you're bringing this, is like, I told her, look, and because I understand how this stuff works, parents is why this is important. Okay. Because it's kind of weird for me to say this. I can go into any class, any teacher group or whatever, and annihilate them. but I'm serious about this. I can like they cannot. I not only can I understand their pedagogical framework, and I'm not saying you have to be like me, but I have enough armament to go in there to know what they're talking about, how they're going about hiding it, and then also the political warfare tactic. Like I understand like the subversive, manipulative attack. When they come back at you, right? And I to the point where I can actually predict the future. You're going to say, let me tell you, teacher, this is what you're going to tell me. You're going to do this thing called the Mott and Bailey. You're going to do this and you're going to do that, and your next response is going to be a perfect example of what I just described, right? And that's because it's kind of weird to say that the whole thing is predictable when you look at their world perspective, like how they act, how they operate. It has logic. I know everyone thinks they're crazy, but they're not crazy. It
Mm-hmm.
has everything about it has logical consistency.
Mm-hmm.
So all you have to do is talk to your kids about objective reality. It's very
I know it
straightforward.
sounds crazy that you would
Yeah,
have to do that, but I mean, but that's a really good point because, I talk to so many parents like every day and they want to know what they can do. And the questions are usually around, how can I supplement the curriculum or how can I opt out of curriculum or how can I move them to a different kind of school or how can I do this or how can I do that? And what it comes right down to is you could do all that. And now with all these school choice initiatives, people think, well, I know I'll send them to a private school and that'll solve all the problems. And it's like, you're dealing with ideas here. It's
yeah,
not the building.
yeah.
The building might protect you to a certain degree if they have different standards from certain kinds of physical violence. But I hope that people aren't just voting away more of their money and rights, because that's what they're doing, is saying, hey, government, could you do like new and different things with my rights and my money? I want to give you a little bit more power than you already have over, how my kids are educated and what it constitutes a school. So, if you're doing that and you're only doing it for physical safety, holy cow, you guys, that's playing right into the
Yeah.
post-liberal mindset, where you're trading in your liberty for safety.
Oh, yeah, we have to talk about
Yeah,
that.
and we're going to talk
Yeah,
about that. But what I would say to you is just what Clint just said is first and foremost, make sure you're not taking for granted that for all the problems going on in your kid's school, and I know some of them are very distracting and, like pronouns and all this kind of stuff, that you're not missing the biggest one that would neutralize all the others. And that is that the school is taking it for granted that everyone either does or should agree that there's no objective reality, that
that's
my
right.
truth, your truth, our truth is a logically consistent and morally appropriate thing to teach small children who live on this planet. So, if you were to teach even your 6-year-old
Yeah,
about objective reality and they went to school and a grown up man tried to say, no, no, I'm really a woman, your 6-year-old would be like, you're cuckoo for
yep,
Cocoa Puffs,
right,
because they'd be very well grounded in reality. Now, that's tough to do when you don't want to tell your kids there's no Santa.
right.
And they take advantage of that. They take advantage of the fact that little kids, well and good too, have vivid imaginations and believe in things that aren't necessarily there, like their imaginary friends and the guy under the bed. And we don't really disabuse them of those notions when they're small, because we think to ourselves, well, it's okay for them to have an imagination. They'll come to it in their own time. But I think modern parents are going to have to accept the fact that their own time ain't going to work.
That's right.
You need to drive home the point that there's no Santa immediately. And those of you who are religious shouldn't have a problem with this, actually, because Santa was always
Pagan.
what?
As in a
Yeah, I
paganist,
mean, you really
yeah.
should be going like, why was I pushing that idea anyway? But you know, if that's the worst thing you have to face, to inoculate your kid against some really toxic ideas, get over it. Because if you allow that to continue, you're not preserving innocence. You're making them sitting ducks for people who want to leverage their innocence to get them to believe other implausibly, ridiculous things about reality. So if we did that, and then if you had a student body, let's say you had a classroom full of first graders. Okay. Now we're talking about 7-year-olds basically. And they go in and they've all been taught from birth on about A is A. This is a table. That is a cup. This is how the real world works. And if there's a God, it's not you. Like if you could drive that point home, and they all sitting there in that class and the teacher comes in and does blah, 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 right? They're less likely to believe it. They're less like, I'm not saying it's impossible because they're still small and that's a big
Yeah.
person.
Well, they'll
And
come
that big
home and
person has power.
tell you what crazy thing my teacher just said, right? They'll come home and tell you because it didn't make sense. It hits their cognitive
Did you
dissonance
know a
pretty quick.
person can be a cat?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
know that a man could have a baby? Like, I mean, and then of course they'll look at you weird, but they'll tell you because they think it's weird. Right now, they're not telling you because the crazy stuff that they're told in school, they go, okay,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
sounds as good as anything else. Santa, tooth fairy, men can be women. I mean, whatever. So we take for granted that the teachers in school have the same view of reality that we do, and they just have different, like you
Mhm.
said, social views. They're just very socially liberal and they think everyone should do whatever they want. Like, no, they think everyone should be able to do what they want because they think that they make their own
That's
reality.
correct. It's a complete difference because it immediately starts violating the liberty of everybody else because that
That's
you
right.
have to conform. It's interesting because just that simple conversation I had with her, my 11-year-old, when she reads a book now, because by the way, anything post probably 2014, but like any of the kids' books has to have some kind of
It won't get
race or
published otherwise.
yeah, or LGBTQ stuff in it. So now my daughter, when she reads this stuff, and even some of the older stuff, but especially this stuff, uh, she now does the same thing that I do when I run into it, and I'm like, right? She immediately closes the door on her mind that and she just basically at that point just has to power through that chapter, right? Let's say that the rest of the story is okay, right? It's not trying to weave in complete Marxist stuff, right? But it's just an adventure story, right? And it's
Right.
got some of this in there, but she knows to immediately just like, okay, I got to power through this stupid stuff, right? Like, but that's all you need. That is all you need for them to actually
Right.
identify it and know what it is they're dealing with, because immediately your brain says, "You're not. I'm not." Okay, just get this over with, right? I don't
But
have.
then the problem though is, and you're right, everything you've just said is right, but my audience will then say, and they're not really completely wrong. They're like, but that's not, then they're wasting their time. They're not getting an education about reality. So they're
That's
sitting
true.
there almost
Yeah.
prisoners for 8 hours a day. And then they come out and they don't know anything because even, okay, let's say we inoculated them. They still come out, they're but ignorant. They don't know anything they
Yeah.
do need to know unless they do it on their own time, which eats into family time, which eats into like their time for their other interests. And so then,
I'm about to say sorry because we supplement our kids' education ourselves
no,
with,
I agree, and
yeah.
so do I.
So
However,
yeah,
this is where I do get a little sympathetic. We're being robbed
yeah,
to
for
pay
sure.
for it. So not only are our kids compelled by law to be there unless you
Yeah,
can provide
or
other
but we're
means.
funding it,
Right,
so
but
we're
we're funding
subsidizing
it.
it.
I mean,
Yeah,
we're talking like way back in the early 20th century, Isabel Patterson warned. She literally said, could there be any more perfect form of tyranny than, compelling a state scheme, compelling children to attend this, institution and then charging their parents to pay for it. I'm paraphrasing. And she was right then, and it's still true now. And so then what happens is parents will say to me, but if I'm paying for it, it should be blah, blah. And that I think is what attracts them to the post liberal mindset, which is kind of like,
yes,
I've given up hope of taking back my freedom. I've given up hope I'm ever going to get it back. And so since it's being taken from me anyway, I want to be in control of it. I want the ring.
right.
I want the ring of power. And so then they appeal to you going, in our schools will have prayer, and in our schools will have the 10 commandments, and in our schools will ban all the gay people. And so because that stands in contrast, and they think they've already accepted the premise that it's perfectly okay for the state to provide the education. And they bought into the premise that education is a right. So that they're not so classically liberal that they've eschewed those ideas like I have and like you have.
Yeah, I have a litmus test too about what a natural right is, and that typically is um, something that does not require human expertise to attain.
There you go.
Now, there are a little bit of ancillary stuff like the military. Obviously, you need the military, which requires expertise, but because if you don't defend your nation, someone can conquer you, then all that will be for naught, right? So
But that's
so
provided for in the Constitution. It's
yeah,
literally
yeah,
the role of
right,
government, actually.
right, yeah, exactly, right. But fundamentally speaking, everything else, like there's no right to educate. There's not an amendment to education, and this is where I always get I'm talking to progressives about this, like, because they say, with progressivism is liberalism. It is liberal. It is American. I'm like, no, dude, you don't understand. Progressivism is everything that liberalism is not. It's got, guess what's not in the Constitution? Social Security is not in the Constitution. Welfare is not in the Constitution. It's not an amendment, right? It's that
Yeah.
public housing isn't in there.
Freedom from
Yeah,
freedom from the need to strive,
yeah,
freedom from the need to take care of your own survival is not what liberty
that's
is.
correct. Yeah, it comes
Okay?
with responsibility for sure, right?
Exactly. And
So
we've now these progressives and even like I said, some of the post liberals who've just sort of thrown it in, are saying that no, at this point, I have a right to be free from whatever the bad thing is, whatever the discomfort is that I'm perceiving. And I want to use government power. I want to use the state to protect me and mine from the infringement on my freedom from the
yeah,
bad
you're
stuff.
doing the same thing. You're just doing the same thing in reverse,
That's
right?
it.
Basically, right? Because
And
the progressives look at our way of life as dangerous to them. That's how they
right.
look at it, right? So they're doing this exact same thing
That's
as
right.
we are.
Everybody thinks the other's oppressing them, and what they don't realize is like it starts with you.
Yeah.
And so I think what I'm hoping you can address is to that audience, to the ones who are still sitting there saying, well, what we need is for the schools to do XYZ, or for me to move my kid to this kind of school instead of that kind of school, is something that can sink into people's brains that if what you actually want is liberty. Now, if you admit, I don't care about liberty, I don't want it, I just want to be physically safe, and I want my kids to have a good paying job in service to the state, whatever, then I'm not talking to you. But if you're a person who walks the earth believing on some level that you want liberty, but you don't articulate it the way we're talking about it, I'm not going to go so far as to say you don't really want it. I'm just going to say that you're mistaken, and you need to sit down and have a chat with yourself about what that would really entail. So to that end, what what would you suggest to people, you're just given your litmus test to find out if something's right, so that's helpful. But if a parent is out there listening and saying, well, no, I think I want liberty-based education, or I think no, I want, what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's complicated, right? Because there are proponents of um, what I would call maybe decentralized education, like community education, like your town takes care of it, not the state. Like, I mean, depending on how you look at it, how big the state overreaches in that. But you have that. Of course, you have homeschooling. But here's my if we're gonna stay with the same Prussianish model, because it's efficient. But is that we actually have two things. There's a couple things how I look at it, and this besides the I'm kind of leaning toward the decentralizing aspect. But if we're going to keep kind of the same functional model we have, what you need, I think, in my opinion, is first off, we actually have conversations about in class, clinical conversations about objective reality or the two belief systems, right? The two belief systems, and the older, of course, it's abstracted at the younger age, and then gets a little bit more in depth as you go older. Here's our basis of objective and subjective reality. Here's our governance models. Here's the types of governments as you get into high school. Here's the Soviets and CCP. Here's how America does things, right? Here's how progressivism works. We actually have clinical discussions about that, not favored one or the other. And we talk about it, objective reality. We talk about metaphysics, right? But outside of that, and so that's just content. To be honest, so it's kind of weird to talk about schools about this way, but I actually think every institution kind of has to do this in my opinion, is you kind of start. It's kind of like the warning label on any food or item that you have,
No,
right?
I agree.
Right, where you say upfront, here's what we believe. This institution believes in. We look at education and pedagogy from an objective reality. This is where we're coming from. This is every bits of our education flows from this worldview. Or, and here's the thing, this is the thing about competition. Don't care if you have a subjective at school, as long as you tell us that's what it is, that you have
That's right.
and then I get to decide which one I get to go to.
Right.
Right. If you have an objective at school, objective, objective like school, you
It could be an
then
objectivist school. I'm down with
yeah,
that.
yeah, you can then arrange it. You can arrange it. Its governance structure. Here's the thing about educate. This is the thing about everybody needs. There's the content of education or the content of any institution that you have, which is not the same. It's the same thing as the American government. It's not the same thing as how it's governed. So then, what you do, because you have an objectively you have objective education, but you have also checks and balances in your education system that do every time somebody tries to bring in subjective, try to overtake it. It's like, nope, right? You can't do, like you put mechanisms to say, no, you just can't bring, you can bring subjectivism in here. We can have a conversation about it. You can't govern education with it. You just can't.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so and this
And
goes
you
for
would
any
hire your
institution.
teachers accordingly.
Correct. Right. You
And
can't, and if
then
you try to subvert it, you're out of here. Right.
that's right.
You have a very low threshold for trying to change the governance mechanisms away from objective reality.
But this is my problem in general with even at the decentralized level with taxpayer funding for these institutions is that it automatically opens us up to be political, and based on our constitution itself, it automatically exposes it to this notion of, equal, every voice has to be represented in theory. I mean, at least if you can vote it that way. And so we have this problem where, if I'm compelled to pay for it by the state, then I have a voice in what it's going to be. And that's how we end up. And then all it is, 51% of us wanted it to be subjective. And here we are. And I
Well,
don't
I
even think
think
they,
they also don't know that that's
well,
what
that's what I'm
happened.
saying. They didn't
Yeah.
literally want it to be subjective. What I'm saying is they bought into a couple of core false beliefs.
Yeah.
One, that the expert class really does know best.
Yeah.
That's been going on since the 1920s. That is not a new thing, by the way. So they bought into this idea that there is an expert class, there's an elect of academics and researchers and so forth that come to me with confidence and authority, telling me we have chosen these things for you because we have studied and we know. And the vast majority of Americans, not being the wiser, in part because they're educated in the same system, believe it and allow them to set the tone. And then, of course, they have been dominated since the same period because progressivism is subjectivism and collectivism. They've been dominated by the self-serving people who wanted us to all agree on this thing. It's very convenient, isn't it? So
Well, it
when I
becomes
say
a religious movement too, right? So
yes,
then you
yes,
cannot go against the doctrine
no,
of it, right? You
no.
get
How very
ostracized.
convenient. We are
Yeah.
now white supremacist or
Yeah.
oppressive. If I say I'm an objectivist, well, I'm by definition racist and oppressive because objective reality is now equated with white supremacy,
Right.
which was a coup. When they managed to pull that off, to say it out loud
Yep.
without any pushback at all. And that was, I mean, we could pinpoint it as that Smithsonian infographic back in
Yeah.
2019 or whatever it was, when there was just little rumblings of, did you see this? But as a nation, as a whole, nobody said, hold the phone.
Yeah.
What
Yep.
the hell?
Yeah.
And just pulled back. And there was a little bit of an outcry, but nothing like what there should have been, because what people don't seem to understand is that is really about as revolutionary a statement and a shift in the belief system as saying the earth is not flat anymore, which was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
This would be more like saying the earth is flat again.
It actually is. It actually, to be honest, like you should actually, it's weird to say this to people, right? But whether it's Kamala Harris or whoever, anytime a leftist is talking to you, they're trying to tell you the earth's flat. It's really
Snow
what
is
they're trying to
black,
do.
the earth is
Yeah.
flat, 2 + 2 is
And
5.
you
It
should
is
look at them that
equivalent.
way, right? You should take them, and this is why I get bent sideways with centrists, right? And I'm like,
There's a middle between objective reality and
yeah,
subjectivism.
like,
What's
no,
the
there's
middle?
no right. Immediately when you do that, you're a subjectivist. You are immediately attached to subjective, but
That's right.
right existence, right? But they're like the centrist, right? Or the reason that I call them turds, the umpires of reasonable discourse, right? Where they're trying to tell you, no, we should look. We should give them we give the left, we give the progressives a chance. Let's hear them out. And I was like, no, I said, no, dude, they're trying to tell me the Earth is flat. No, right? Like like I asked, how long, even you centrist, would you legitimately have a conversation with a flat earther before you've had enough to
That's right.
legitimize it,
Or
right?
somebody wants to talk to you, as they are currently doing, about, pedophilia is just another sexual orientation.
Yeah, how long before you?
Cannibalism seems like a good idea.
When is it reasonable to tell them get out of here? And I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
my line is this tiny. I was like, okay,
Well, for
what are
me,
you
it would have been
saying?
somewhere before boys can be girls.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
I'm pretty much thinking that somewhere before your little boy likes to play dress up in dresses equals he's really a female trapped in
right.
the wrong body. That is literally esoteric religion.
Yeah,
And the fact that we're allowing this to be taught in state funded school, taxpayer funded schools, and that we're even further considering electing people, not just one person, to high office who not only support that and are keen to codify it permanently
yeah,
in our law, and we're just like gnashing our teeth on the sidelines is bonkers to me. And so I guess my point is, because people are probably going, so what's your point, Deb? My point is that if you want to get away from that, at this you sort of have to walk. You're gonna have to use your own feet and walk. You will not be able to change their minds.
yeah,
This is like no more than you could change the flat earther's mind. The flat earther sitting there telling you the earth is flat, you might as well be trying to, what is that phrase? Administer, an antidote to poison to the dead, or so. I don't know what it is. Like you cannot do it, that you're talking to zombies. And so what do you do when you're faced with a zombie? You don't reason with them that they shouldn't want to eat your face off. You run away. You get away. Now, people say, well, that you can't isolate yourself in a cabin in the woods. I didn't say that. I just said, consider that you may have to build a new school,
yeah,
homeschool, work together with other people to find alternative methods of education. We have the internet. We have so many different tools that you can use to educate your kids. But you do have to first acknowledge objective reality is that it is what it is. And people running the system are flat earthers philosophically. And that you don't need them. There's this, as efficient as the Prussian system may be in some respects to mass
yeah,
educate people, if you want to call it that. And as much as we're sort of stuck with the buildings and the infrastructure, the taxes and all those things, you don't have to stick with that. You have to pay for it. Nothing much you can do. But the more you leave, the more political capital you have to say, I'm not going to
yeah.
pay for it anymore. But I don't see a way out. I mean, maybe tell me how I'm wrong. I don't
Well,
think,
no, that's well, I mean,
I'm not saying don't go to school. I'm just saying I
right.
think you might have to kind of
No,
make your own schools.
that's my thing. Well, yeah, you probably do, and probably, yeah, and then, well, see, here's the thing. I guess where we're getting at is, you don't have to take those guys, the left, in this conversation as legitimate. There's you're not. He's like, I don't. You're not legitimate. I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to talk. I don't have to. I actually don't have to
Right.
argue it. Like, and here's what people need to understand about this whole thing. Um, so since their worldview is about taking yours over, they require conflict for this.
That's right.
So they need you to argue with them. They need you to argue with them
Right.
about the minutia of education and how it's supposed to be done. They actually need you to fight. When I say fight back, they actually fight back on their terms, basically. And so I think that what you kind of was saying is, like, when you say walk away, you're like, basically all you're saying is like, you're a illegitimate joke. I don't have time for you. I'm gonna go start my new thing over here. It has nothing to do with you. Like, if you come over here, I'm just gonna tell you, it's like, hey, this is what we do. Take it or leave it. Right? Like, there's no
Exactly. And I mean, you
right.
can do that while still having your children in the building or in the system. Just
Yeah.
understand there is a cost benefit analysis to be done with that.
Yeah.
So, first is what I said before of like, even if you inoculate your child against the bad ideas that they're not giving up, now your child is wasting 8 hours a day. They could be learning something useful as opposed to a bunch of garbage that they reject. They're also going to be learning a certain level of cynicism towards adults and towards the world and towards their own agency.
That's
They can feel
true.
like they don't have any. So if there's one thing that I've learned about who's going to make it in the world to come, is people with agency. People
Yeah.
who are willing to just get up and do what they've got to do to stay alive are the ones who are going to make it. The ones who are going to wait for somebody to come and rescue them are, it's not going to just be about it won't happen. It could be a matter of life and death in our lifetime. So the agency is really, really important to still in your kids. And I don't know that you get that by saying just go and put up with it and come home and we'll read a book separately. The second thing is that you run the risk that you will be literally targeted.
Yeah.
You or your child, everything from cancellation, fired from your job, all the way to just bullied and targeted in school, depending upon how you choose to push back. Now, if you're one of the lucky ones who lives in a small-ish town or an area where the majority of people around you pretty much agree with you, and it's a tiny minority of loudmouths who are just making some trouble and trying to get a GSA club in the school or trying to get SEL pushed down your throat or whatever, and you can manage to dominate the school board and, really push back and hire a superintendent who hires the best teachers who don't think this crazy way, then of course that's a whole different
Yeah.
situation and only you know that. But you have to be honest with yourself. It's not like, well, we have these two good teachers and our principal's really good. And then like everybody else is kind of crazy, but we have these three great people. Be honest with yourself. Like, what percentage of your child's time is spent like fighting, intellectually, emotionally, everything else, fighting off the crazy and yours? And what percentage of it is just shooing them away like flies? The shooing away like flies, look, you're always going to be in a situation in life where there are people who don't agree with you. That's fine. That's life skill, right? But when it's 80 to
Predominant.
90%,
Yeah.
then you have to sit and think like maybe there's a reason our kids are mentally they're having these mental health problems. I was just
Oh,
reading about
dude.
this
For sure.
morning. We think of the kids have problems, the kids have mental health problems. Like, did it ever occur to you that the kids are sane as the day is long, but they're in an insane environment with some not so sane adults? And how would you react? Wouldn't you be anxious? Wouldn't you feel like, what the?
Yeah, just think about your kid in an insane asylum, and they're sane. They're just whatever trapped in there for a day, right? You'd freak out, right?
Of
It's the
course you
same.
would.
Yeah.
But we don't think of it that way. We think that our kids have all the problems. And then, of course, we take the blame on ourselves or we blame the phones. And I'm not saying the phones are innocuous, but I really think the one piece of this puzzle that we don't look at nearly hard enough is how much it actually harms the brain of a bright, curious,
Yeah.
intellectually sound child who has intellectually sound and capable parents with good values and morals and stuff at home to go into what is effectively an insane asylum where people go, the earth is flat. Oh, and by the way, the flat earth is going to blow up and end in 12 years anyway. So, how sane would you be?
Yeah. Well, okay, so what people need to understand about the entire construct of progressivism, and I'm using progressive because people don't realize it's both the moderate and the so especially the woke version, but even progressivism eventually does this. So what they're attempting to do is to erode all of our limiting principles, right?
Yes.
So the Constitution is a document of limiting principles. It limits the government. And we all agree to what it is we as humans are allowed and not allowed to do to each other, right? We come to an agreement. It's about limiting principles. So then the entire project of the left, and this includes the post-liberal right, to be honest, is to erode limiting principles. And so what that means is these schools are constructed, especially with the queer theory, to erode. When the erosion, because it's collectivist, right? So they need it. They do it on the two poles, right? So not only do they need society to have its limiting principles eroded, right? So they can take over, but they need individuals who basically erode their own. Eventually decide to erode their own person. They do it themselves. You actually, the best trick of the devil or wokeism is that you convince yourself to erode your own limiting principles that your parents instilled in you,
That's
right?
right.
So, and your family. So when you're going to these schools, that's what's happening. And so even if they're inoculated, like it's like antibodies. They know, like those. They know that you're not supposed to be there, right? Because you're bursting that bubble, right?
Right.
And so they're attacking you because they're trying to. They need because here's the thing: conflict and agitation are another means of eroding your limiting principles because eventually you've just had enough. That's what the reactionary comes from. You've had enough, and you're willing, with enough pressure and enough agitation, to say, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with you. We're going to take over. You go off the handle because you, in essence, you've been goaded into abandoning your limiting principles, or the other way
Right.
around. I always say this: the left wants you to either, of course, they want conflict. They want you to be conscientized, meaning they want you to be a believer, if possible. They want you, especially want you to compromise your limiting principles. So here's the thing, progressives like, oh, let's compromise. Yeah, so you don't understand what you're compromising. You're compromising your limiting principles. That's what every time what the synthesis of the dialectic is, if we get technical, is it's not synthesis. They're eroding your limiting principles. That's what they want
That's
you to
right.
compromise it. And then if you don't do any of those things, they'll take capitulation. I give up. I just give up. I quit. Right. And
That's right.
they win in all four of those scenarios.
Which is
Right.
why I don't love saying walk away. Don't
Right.
hear me saying like, I'm gleeful about this, or I think this is a great way to entice people to homeschool, because I don't.
I
I would
think
rather people consciously choose that that's what's right for them than feel like they're ceding the territory and the lives of the children. So I'm
just
not keen on that.
just saying, I don't find you legitimate. You're not legitimate. I don't have to listen to you. I'm going to go do my own thing. That is not capitulating. That's not
No.
That's the other way around. It's like, no, you're not legit. Think about that. Just telling us that you're not legitimate. You're like, would you want a flat earther coming and building bridges for you? Right?
No.
Right? No. Right?
No.
I'd look at, even if his math looked okay, I was like, okay. It's like, okay, your math looks okay, right? But you're a flat. I was like, no, I'm gonna get someone who actually believes the world is round, right? Like it's the same thing. You look at that flat earth. I'm sorry, dude, you're just not legitimate. I can't take you seriously. You're
Right.
not building bridges. I'm sorry, critical pedagogist. You don't believe in a subjective reality. You're not legitimate. I'm not
Right.
letting you teach my kids. Right.
Well, and
And
they
so
get you, the one of the ways that they get you, parents, initially, is they start with that limiting principle of what I have is mine by right. It's my property, whether it's
they
my
turn it around on you. They turn that.
right. They turn it
Yeah.
around on you and tell you
Yeah.
that everything you have, including your body, if it's the wrong shade,
Yeah.
okay, if it's the wrong sex, according to them, everything you have is ill-gotten
Yeah.
or is somehow at someone else's expense. So they
That's
get
right.
you first with the equity principle, which in itself is a violation of the limiting principle of this country,
Correct.
that
Absolutely.
you have natural rights, and one of which is you own your freaking life.
Yep.
You own your body, you own the fruits of your labor, which is your property, you own your time, you own your ideas, you own your thoughts, you own your speech. That these are things that nobody should be able to take from you because they require nobody else's to give to you. And using your litmus test. And so when they say to you, but don't you want everyone to end up in the same place? And you're inclined to go, well, that would be nice. They've made their inroad.
Yeah.
They've made your inroad. And they're
That's the
experts.
compromise. That's
That's the
where you
compromise.
compromise. Yeah.
And you sound cruel. You may think I sound cruel saying, no, I don't. But what I'm going to argue here is that you should get used to saying, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
Because the only way for that to happen, and if we understood how the world actually works, we would know this and it would not be controversial, is through massive force.
Yeah.
Because human beings are not equal. I'm not 7 feet tall.
That's right. Yeah.
I will never play basketball. I'm 58 years old. I will never have another baby. I mean, things are just not going to be equal because nothing in this natural world comes out exactly the same.
What they like to do, I like to tell when I talk about the compromising, is like a metaphor of what they're trying to do is convince you to shoot a hole in your own boat.
That's right.
Right. That's when we talk about compromise. I'm not talking about like you give a little, I give a little, and then we come to some, middle ground,
Yep.
compromise. That's not what they're trying to do. They make it sound like that. That's not what they're doing. They're trying to convince you to shoot that in your best interest is to shoot a hole in your boat of liberty. Right. That's
Right.
and all of, that's what they want there. So it's compromising the integrity of your own soul, of your own
That's right.
person, right? That's
That's
what they
right.
want from you, right? So
It is absolutely built on envy and resentment. And it's one of the easiest things to sell because being human and being flawed. This is what I'm saying. They use objective realities against us. Being human and being flawed, we're all capable of feeling these negative emotions that we really don't understand, and so on. And if they tap into them effectively and just niggle at them, like picking a scab and picking a
yep,
scab and picking a scab, and nobody ever questions it. In other words, there's no alternate view to compare it to. Then it's really easy. This is why I'm actually against banning these ideas from academia, So
Yeah.
people want to, ban CRT and ban all these things. And I'm
Well,
like,
I'm
you
glad you're
can't.
saying that. I'm glad you're saying that. So let's take I think Rufo's New College, for example, or right. So here's my opinion. It's okay to have a class on critical race theory, right? It's okay to have a class on it. It's okay to have a Marxist, right, or a crit professor there. Just they can't govern the college with critical race theory.
That's
That's
right.
right. That's like your education should be objectively neutral,
That's
right?
right.
But it's not really neutral because you're anchored in objective reality. But it's okay to have these classes, right? But your governance. Here's the thing: when you govern by objective reality, this is the argument I make about with the like the centrists, the turds, the umpires, where what we call the marketplace of ideas is not governed by objective reality. It's actually Cartesian. It's actually it is subjectivist. It's governed by
That's right.
subjectivism. So all the stuff that we're arguing about, like it's not playing by the rules of objective reality. It's playing by the rules of subjectivism. Therefore, um, we have no universal ground upon which to make uh, coherent decisions and
Nope.
understand the world in a coherent way, a concrete way,
You
right?
certainly can't improve the world if you can't understand it.
Right now,
And
they do hit every once in a while. It's like a blind, a broken clock, right? They hit
right.
on something, right? Because I think the subjectivists have kind of have honed in on some parts of our human nature, right? That are especially like creative parts, right? But they pathologize it,
Yeah.
right? So every once in a while they hit on something that seems true and accurate, and do they leverage that whatever they hit on, like here, like they stumble upon objective reality of human nature, right? Because eventually, if you're exploring existence, you're going to stumble onto stuff, even if you're a subjectivist,
Mhm.
right? And then they leverage the heck out of that, right? But anyway, it's just we need a marketplace of if we're going to have a marketplace of ideas, it needs rules on
Right.
it, and it should be bound by objective
Well,
truth.
and the other thing is in a system or a world governed by objective reality, their ideas have as much opportunity to be heard and to win people over
Right.
as our ideas, or as ideas of objective, purveyors of objective reality, sort of whatever. But when they lose the
Right.
argument, right? That means they lose. Like they
Yeah.
they don't accept defeat, in the sense even when you show them using logic, which by the way is mathematically,
Yeah.
like that's a thing. It's not made up. It's not subjective. Logic is objective. So when you can actually dissect their arguments, as some debaters do so very, very well. I mean, James does it well. Who else? Murray.
Oh yeah, Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray does it very well. Even Ben Shapiro, to a certain degree, does it very well, where you take the arguments of these people and you dissect them logically to show them they have not won their argument. In fact, in many cases, they have not even made an argument that is an argument. They've made claims, but they have not.
Sometimes they make your argument for you, right?
Exactly. And and
Yeah.
and see, that's why I think it would actually be important to go ahead, especially at the college level, and allow these ideas to be taught, provided, as you said, that the governance of the whole system and the institution is, just absolutely strict objective reality. And therefore, you had your chance. Now, if you can come back year after year after year and make a better argument, now I know they can't, and
Right.
they can't, because you can't
Eventually
argue
they'll
this snow is
I know
black.
you'll say they'll stop, but eventually they won't be held as legitimate if they keep losing their arguments over and over
That's
again,
right. That's right.
right?
They won't stop for a long time. I mean, we've had communism or Marxism, whatever, come back again and again. But why? Why does it find purchase each time that it does? It does because the society in which it rises up again has, to a large degree, failed to discuss, identify, hold dear
Yeah.
the principles of not
Well, I
just
have
liberty, but objective reality.
I actually have an answer to why that is. So, starting with, like, we go back to, I think, therefore I am, Descartes. Um, So what they do is they take, and this is why it's very complicated, because they take rationalism, reason, and empiricism, and historicism, and even science. I call it scientism, which it actually is. So they take all these complex uh, philosophical and even empirical measurements of the world, and they marry it to their esoteric belief system. But it's Gnostic, right? So you don't know what so I call it apologetics for pantheism, right? So basically, right? So what they're doing is they're using rationalism, reason, and empiricism to create an apologetic for a pantheistic worldview, right? And so, but because it's Gnostic and pantheist, you don't know that that's what they're doing because it's hidden. It's like you only know that if you know where that guy got his. If you know Descartes was a Jesuit, right? And that he had dealings with the Rosicrucian Gnostics, then you're like, okay, I know now. I know what you're doing. You have to have it's a cipher key. You have to actually know that that's what they're doing when they map them together. So what we're running into is the minute the Enlightenment came around and rationalism, reason, and empiricism was the big thing to do there, you created an entire industry of apologetic pantheism, right? Which looks convincing. It looks real. It looks like you're willing to have a good faith argument about all of these things. Like it looks like something that we should actually participate in arguing about and having really deep philosophical conversations about.
Right.
And every time we do that, every time we give it legitimacy. Every time we argue with them about their subjective worldview, right, and not calling it out and not saying, hey, that's a subjective worldview, without calling it for what it is, you gives them legitimacy. As long as you don't put the spotlight on it, right, that's what they're doing, that they're smuggling in the esoteric on top of the exoteric, right, you'll keep taking them in good faith. And this even goes to the gender stuff where Colin, right, is always battling those guys, where even their science, they'll bring like real science, what looks like real science, to say that that there's more than two sexes or whatever, or more than two genders, right? Like, and it look like to a normie, you're like, yeah, I guess, right? Like we have these experts telling us that this is the case, and it's this. So this is the trick. This is what Hegel did. This is what Marx did. This is what all of these guys do. Is they take really dense, really convincing data sets and map, and they're basically doing it to smuggle in their worldview. And they worked extensively, especially the Soviets, the Fabians and the Soviets and the Chinese, extensively on looking at how to manipulate our psychology, so we can't tell that we can't tell that's what they're doing, right? And manipulate, and then and almost get us to eat the cheese and then self-justifying it, right? So anyway, so that's why it's so hard. And this is kind of where I want to get to a bit, where I'm like, I think I made a post the other day on X where I was saying, don't tell me what an intellectual believes or what they're saying. Show me where they get their ideas from. Show me, right? So because if I see on the left, if you see Marcuse or Marx or Crenshaw or or Hegel or any of those guys, right? Or on the right, you see Carl Schmitt, Strauss, Heidegger, right? You see, or Mussolini, you see any of those guys, you're an esoteric. I almost don't need to know anything else about what this thinker is trying to peddle to me, because they are doing that exoteric and esoteric mapping. They're doing that mapping on purpose. And
well, that's why I tell parents all the time that they need to, if you're concerned and you think some stuff's going on at the kid's school, you need to learn more about the teachers. I mean, you can look at the curriculum. There is no curriculum to look at. First of all, Common Core got rid of curriculum. That most you might see some stuff coming home that was pulled from NGO developed curriculum that they pulled free off of websites, or they got at a professional development seminar. But it's not like your state or your district is going, and now we will discuss the history textbook. That went by the wayside with Common Core, and some would say with No Child Left Behind. So there is no the curriculum.
Right.
What there is, there is a pool of teachers without curriculum, left to their own devices, educated in teacher colleges to read things like Paulo Freire and Marx and Marcuse and all the people that that Clint is naming. And so what you need to do is you need to get better at asking questions. If you don't ask the teacher directly, go check their social media, check
Yeah.
their CV. If you can possibly get hold of it, you can find out where they went to school, look into what they studied, where they got their degree, what etc. And you will be able to tell if you see that somebody got a degree, for example, University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, the one I went to, but within the past 10 years,
Yep.
and you go look at what their course catalog is and was,
Yeah.
you don't really even need to ask them. You would actually need to just observe or ask them a couple of questions to rule out the
Yeah.
possibility that they believed what they were taught and they chose the school accordingly, because the vast majority of teachers in the pipeline are reading what you're talking about, are thinking it is the way
Yeah.
to teach, that teaching is a political act, that this is what we do, that our goal is social engineering. Our goal as teachers is social engineering. And so then you don't have any more questions to ask. If you're not seeing
Yeah.
people who have, I have a PhD in math or I have a master's in biology, and that's why I'm teaching this subject, and
Yeah.
here's my curriculum, you can look at it, then assume they have studied what you just said. And if those are the ideas running around in their head, what do you think they're saying to your child?
Yep. Yeah. They can't help themselves. It's a religious
Yeah.
calling for them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so you
Yeah.
actually don't just find out where they got their ideas from, right? It's very,
Yeah.
very straightforward, right?
We need
And
to
then
ask more questions and stop and we stop imbuing an entire profession with some kind of unearned hero status based on the fact that they've chosen, let's say, to make less money than other people of a similar education, which isn't true, by the way. It
yeah,
isn't true. If you
no,
compare and contrast the salaries of, let's say, your average middle management person in the white collar world, which is a white teacher's white collar job, with similar years of education, the private sector person on average makes much less,
yeah,
especially when you add in the benefits and the pension. So this notion that somehow they're so poorly paid, and they go, well, the working conditions. Well, whose fault is that?
yeah.
They make
Well,
their own working conditions. Would you long stay somewhere that
I
was like that? Or
I
would you
mean,
quit?
well, they're communist working conditions is what they are, right? So the whole thing is a socialist project, right? So of
Mm.
course you're going to have working conditions the way socialist working conditions in a socialist
If you're
environment.
going
That's
to support the notion that we don't suspend people for, we're bringing it full circle now to wrap it up, where we started, where you said that if we accept that humans are flawed and we're aware of that, we're self-aware of it, and I'm not going to take your stuff and you don't take my stuff, and that's probably a good rational way to live. Well, if you eliminate that in a school building where you have all these kids at different ages and they're pretty much held captive and they come from all different backgrounds, and who knows what's going on at home, and who knows what kind of learning issue, again, what kind of diet they have, who knows, but they don't have any agency in the situation, and you eliminate any of the limiting principles of the institution that say you may not take each other's stuff and you may not hit each other. And if you do, there will be
consequences.
reality
Yep.
will visit upon you, a consequence, just like in the real world. If you eliminate that, why would it not devolve into Lord of the Flies?
Yep. Well, I mean, that's the what do they call it? Restorative justice, right? That's the
Exactly.
yeah.
And it's because of the containment. See, people think like, no, the real story of Lord of the Flies, these guys crashed on an island and they actually took care of each other. And it really didn't turn out like Fleming's book or whatever his name was. Not Fleming, whoever wrote the book. Anyway, it didn't turn out like his book. And I'm like, okay, interesting. Well, guess what? They had a whole jungle to wander around in. They were literally going to die if they didn't depend on each other. It was a very small group. They were self-selected because they all liked each other when they started out. And you know what I mean? Like, this is not analogous.
Yep.
You have compelled these children at a huge age range
Yeah.
into a building with adults they don't know who are also similarly mixed, okay?
Yeah.
And you've removed all the rules of civilization and said everything will be fine. No, it will not be fine.
Nope. Well,
Why
not
would you
and
expect it to be fine?
yeah, I don't want to bring this to like the school shooting phenomenon, but why do we think that this is happening, right? And then when you go to places like, for example, Japan, right? Or I think there's a better examples in this that do guns but don't have shootings, right? It's because they have rules, right? And
Switzerland.
they're
I think
not,
maybe
yeah,
they've had one.
yeah, and they're not eroding. They're not going around trying to erode limiting principles, right? They kind of have. It's more. It's not. It's less. It's more cultural in those
Yeah.
places, right? But like, but that's kind of basically is what it is you have limiting principles, right? And
Well,
like
and you
taking,
don't in this country, we do something paradoxical.
yeah,
We put adults in charge of everything for kids. We've now said that kids up to the age of 26 are basically children. So we put adults in charge of everything, and they're dictating everything for these kids' lives and telling them what to do and where to go and how to be and all this stuff. We have very few third spaces anymore where kids can be without adults and still be safe from creepy adults who want to hang out there. Okay. And so, because we've now taken that limiting principle away, that no, it's just another orientation for an adult man to like little girls and little boys, or adult female for that matter. And so, if you did have a third space of a playground, no, Japan has these, they have these no adults play spaces. And the kids have to work it out. They have to figure
yeah.
out how to take turns on the swings and whatnot. But if there's always gonna be adults there, then the creepy adult lurking around who ought not be there. And then you say, well, you can't look askance at him because that's
Well,
bigotry.
the kids naturally look at the leader, the adult figure, to work it out
That's
for
what they
them,
do.
right? So
Totally normal.
that's what humans do, right? That's just how who's the
And we're
authority figure.
teaching that from a very young age. We're teaching them that they should do that. That on top of that, they should model their behavior on the behavior of the adults in their midst who self-identified leader,
Yeah,
because they do that now.
it's I guess it's a technocratic praxis is what that is, I would think.
Mhm.
Is so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and they're sort of technically transmitting the worldview or
Well, just like
the
metaphysical belief, yeah.
metaphysical belief system.
Yeah, well, just like the Supreme Court Judge Brown, right? Where she couldn't answer, like then James says she has to defer to an expert for what a woman is, right? That's the tech. That's what we're talking about. That's you abdicate to some authority figure for figuring out what's real, what's objective, like what I like, and so that's what everyone needs to say. That's what's happening is like they're trying to get you to abdicate your ability to know what is real or not to a technocratic expert, right? And or the Gnostic elect, as James likes to call it, right? So or the Soviet, right? So that's what they're trying to do, right? So yeah, and so yeah, that's how getting your kids to say to do that where that's why I like team sports, for example, right? Where they hey man, you guys got to figure some of this stuff out, right? It's not going to always be the coach, right? You guys got to figure how you're going to play together, right? So but it's kind of weird to say this. I think we have to have reverse praxis. We tell the kids, here's what we're going to do. Tell them the theory. It's like, okay, we're going to practice classic liberal, right? Here's some of the things you can do that kind of an application of it, right? It's like that you can do that are in the heart of classic liberalism, right? But you tell them that's what you don't hide it from them. You tell them this is exactly what we're doing, right? And this is why. Now try it and see if it works. Tell us what see what you learn from it, right? And not because the progressives do the opposite. They say they put you in there and they say, okay, do this. It's already lined out for them what to do. And then they go, okay, student, tell us what you learned, right? You tell us, you teach us what you learned, right? It's the opposite, right? And so now you're inculcating them to the theory slowly over time instead of the other way. They're not telling them hey, we're teaching you how to be a little socialists, activists. They don't tell you that, right? They let you work it out for yourself.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, so maybe we need a little bit of reverse of that. I think we need more, and I think this is kind of where you're getting at. Parents, in particular, talk to your kids about the way. If you don't know how the United States is constructed and why it's constructed the way it is, and the belief
Right.
systems in it, and by the way, this can dovetail into your religion if you're Christian or Jewish or whatever. That's fine.
Right.
That's perfectly fine. But have these conversations with them.
Yeah, and you can
right?
start with very young kids just saying, "How do you know what you know?"
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you can and start with something very simple. Like you just say, like, "What is this?" Right? And then I say, "Well, it's a pencil or it's a pen, whatever." And you say, "Well, how do you know? How do you know that it is?" And actually, I did this when I was teaching first grade. I did a lesson And it was for sort of science, if you will, for first grade science, but I was always sneaking my little objective reality lessons in there. I took a paper bag and I filled it with a wide variety of just random objects, like a rock, a ping pong ball, a sock, like just random stuff that kids would know what they were. And we did a variety of experiments where one kid would be, blindfolded, and the other kid would hold the bag, the paper bag, and that child would have to reach into the bag and take an object, and without taking it out of the bag, because I never trusted the blindfold, just feel it. Now they could feel it and they could try to like listen to it, or they could ask their friend, like, put it next to my ear or something, see if they could use their different. The one thing they couldn't do was taste it. I wouldn't let them put their tongue on it. Okay.
No
But
strep throat
they
here.
could try to smell it. They could try to smell it, feel it, hear it, tap on it. All those kinds of things. And then they not only had to describe it, because I wanted them to write down, to have to come up with adjectives and
Yeah,
vocabulary,
smooth, hard, whatever. Yeah.
right, to describe what they were feeling or hearing or smelling or whatever. But they also had to make like a prediction of what it was based on their sensory perceptions,
hmm
and then take off the blindfold, observe what it actually was. What did they get right? What did they not get right? And, what was the thing that really made them think that was the thing? Right. And it was partly about properties of matter. Okay, that's what I called it. I called it a lesson on properties of matter. But what it really came down to was teaching these kids that your five senses are how you make sense of the world, and it's how
Yeah.
you know what a thing is.
That's
And
very Thomas Reed. That's kind of what he would tell you to do, right? It's
so you
exactly
can
his.
do this with
Yeah.
6 and 7-year-olds because I've done
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And there are other I taught measurement using kitchen stuff. Like we made butter, we rolled eggs down a thing, and we saw which is harder, cracking the egg this way or that way. Why? Why do you think that is? So little kids are little scientists. Maria Montessori knew this, and that's why I love the Montessori method. But when you do things like this, what are you actually doing? You're actually teaching your children about objective reality
That's right.
without having some high-minded philosophical
Yeah.
conversation.
It's very. It is praxis, right? It is praxis, but it's grounded in objective reality, not
That's
subjective
right.
reality,
How
right?
do you
So
know what you know? You
yeah,
observe. That's why
yeah.
when they say things like, this person was assigned, female at birth, it's like, no, they were observed.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy that, where when we talk about it's called epistemology for people who don't know.
Yeah.
But so I like to use this example is okay. When you ask somebody, okay, how does a bird fly? Right? They go, well, it flaps its wings, right? And then you go, okay, how do you know a bird flies? Right? And they go, well, I watch it, I can see it, right? And I was like, yes, exactly. So but here's the thing. Here's what's interesting, is that epistemology, that world, that is correct. It's correct, but it's a shallow understanding of it, because if you ask an ornithologist who's a bird doctor, a bird scientist, they'll tell, or a physicist, they'll give you this much layer, way more information about how a bird flies,
Right.
right? Like than just observing it, right? Like, or they're observing other things about the bird that you didn't just by looking at it. And so this is kind of trying to dovetail this into letting people know that your intellectual, so classic liberalism is the same thing. Everybody thinks it's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? And our natural rights. Okay, yeah, you're right. That is true. But did you know it's about our limiting principles? Did you know it's about a flawed and limited man? Did you know it's about an objective reality and existence? Right? Did you know? Did you even, until we've talked about it to the day? Did you even know that? Uh, here's another thing: the Constitution is not a piece of paper. They didn't mean
No,
it that way. They meant it as the constitution of a people that believe in the same belief system.
that's right.
Okay, so and that so there's this huge layer of understanding, and this goes for on the left too. So what they don't so everybody says, if I were to give to the motto of progressivism, it's to help and include those less fortunate. That's uplift and include those less fortunate. That would be the
Right.
motto, right? I was like, do you even know where progressivism comes from? Do you know what it believes? Do you know, like, there's this deep layer underneath it? Same thing for post-liberalism. Do you know who Carl Schmitt is? You probably should, right? Do you know who Martin Heidegger or Strauss is? You probably should, right?
Exactly.
Right. And
Exactly.
so
And even like more to the point, do you know where progressivism comes from? It's more like the question that I would ask is, how do you know whom to uplift? How do you
Yeah.
define fortunate so that you have a metric under which you find the less
Well,
fortunate?
what's
And how do you even define fortunate? Because fortunate equals lucky.
yeah.
Lucky means there's no initiative and there's no agency. So, I mean, I'm that annoying teacher that
Yeah.
I take all the words apart. And then the student is like, I mean, people might say, yeah, that's really annoying, Deb. But most of the students I've done this with in my debate classes that I used to teach, they'd actually come away from it, their minds permanently altered. When you have these kinds of conversations with kids, especially if they're middle school and above, something magical happens. They can't go back. So you start picking words apart
Yeah.
and you pick the premise apart. So yes, they need to know where postmodern, where the progressive ideas come from. They need to do that also. But I find that my inroad to get them to want to know it is to first make them incredulous that anyone would believe it. So the
Well,
way that I do that is pick the words apart.
I think the biggest barrier to that is the use of quote unquote common sense, right? So when you ask a progressive, well, who are we uplifting? Well, it's just common sense. It says people of color, right? It's just common sense, right?
Yeah, and
And
then
so
I, and
now,
then I
so
throw back at them.
right,
I did this in the class. They
yeah,
said, "Well, the rich are the more fortunate." I said, "Okay." By the way, I don't ever tell them they're wrong. I
right,
just go to the board and I write down rich, and I said, "Okay, who's so let's define rich." So we now have the word is
yep,
rich. The word is we know that anybody who isn't rich. So who's rich? So I'm going around. I ask each kid to come up with what is rich.
yeah,
And they're looking at each other and they give me a number and then another one gets a number. And then I say, okay. So I start writing the numbers down and they're very different. And then I say, all right, well, now what about if you live in New York City where, an apartment costs blah, 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 blah. And I'll write that down. So would you be still rich if you met, and they look at each other like, oh, and I say, all right, well, what about if you live in like the middle of Oklahoma where, a house costs this? So I start giving them these things to show them that ironically, that everything is relative. People
yeah.
are perfectly content to pretend that words like rich and poor and marginalized and fortunate have objective definitions when in fact those are the relative definitions.
Yeah, that's the mystification play, right? So
Yes.
it's the I call it's called polysemy, right? So everything has more than one has multiple meanings on it,
Yes.
and that is how they mystify people because you don't
Right.
know which one. Diversity? What do we? Well, right? Well, yeah, I believe in diversity, right? So no, you don't.
That's right.
There's two definitions of that, and you don't need right. So yeah, but then everybody's like, oh, it's just common sense what diversity is. It's just common sense what woke means, right?
That's right.
It's like okay, well, what's like somehow we have to burst that common sense bubble. Where it's like, hey, you have to actually, what is it? Where'd you get that idea that it's common sense? What does that mean? Like, that's why I say, people say that gets annoying when you ask, okay, what do you mean by common sense?
That's
So
right.
then people they immediately get defensive when you ask them that, right? When you ask what is common, or what do you mean common sense? What does that mean? Can you define
Right.
that for me?
Right.
Right? Because you're basically exposing their shallow their shallow
Exactly.
understanding of common sense, right? I guess we got to figure a way
Well,
to do that with
and then too, that you expose that they do have these shallow definitions. And then when you call them out on stuff and they tell you you have a shallow definition of something. So for example, if you say human nature,
yeah. Oh,
they say
yeah.
common sense,
Yeah.
we say human nature, they go, what's that? And so the difference between us, as I see it, is you and I
Yeah.
can actually give a
Yeah.
definition
That's right.
of human nature.
Yeah.
And while it can't necessarily be like quantified per
Right.
se, it can be observed. It can be demonstrated over the course of history to be a real thing. Kind of like we know gravity exists because
Yeah.
we observe it. So it goes beyond a theory, whereas common sense is like, what the hell is that?
Right. Yes. Right. Exactly.
So
Well, and this is what Thomas Reed was saying is that when he uses the word common sense, he actually means literally your common senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose,
that's
the
right.
touch, right? And that what you what you observe of the objective using those senses, which you retrieve from the objective world with your senses, is the foundation of common sense, right? Because when you see, if you fall off a tree, you're going to fall to the. You can observably, you will see yourself fall and hit the
That is
ground, right?
true. That is
Right, and
true. Hmm.
right, and so you have to say, hey, don't climb so high, or make preparations, right? Like, so now your common sense is attributable to actual reality, right? And not, it's not just made. It's what we progressives call common sense is not. It's subjective, right? It's
Right.
common sense in their world, right? To be
Right.
honest, right? So
Well, and the thing is, even then, because we've already talked about, there are times they say things where there's a kernel of truth.
yeah,
Right. So as an example, in my debate class, there were kids who said, how can you say that, this doesn't disproportionately affect, I don't know if they use that word, but they said, this affect black people more or whatever. And I said, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. When, where, how, and why does it? And so on. We got into how, yes, this can be true. This could be a true statement that because of slavery or because of various things and programs and so on, that you have a greater percentage of a population that exists in poverty, so on and so forth. But what I wanted them to get to was that just because something is commonly understood or observed, like there's a greater percentage of poor people, let's say, of the black community who is poor relative to whatever, then by their definition of poor, because we define that too, then so just because that is true does not mean that your prescription of what to do about it is true, or that your other observations around it, like why it's that way.
why? Yeah, exactly.
That's the
Why?
biggest one,
Yeah,
is simply saying, well, it's common sense. We all know that this is true. And I'm like, is it equally common sense that it's that way because? And in getting the students to admit out loud, and it wasn't easy. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and
yeah,
say that even with sixth graders and seventh graders, after all of elementary school being taught that it was just everybody knows it's because white people are racist, right? That they didn't have any evidence. They just didn't have any evidence that that was the beginning, middle, and end of the explanation. The only evidence they had is that's what they were told. And once I got them to wrap their minds around they didn't have the information, I even let them turn them loose and said, go Google it. Find me
yep,
evidence that you know this to be true across the board. And they came back with little tidbits of where it might be true. And I kept saying, well, that's localized. That's there. That's in this situation. That's 100 years ago. I was like, no, you need to show me the systemic nature. And they couldn't do it. And so I'd done my damage. In other
yeah,
words, my goal was not to convince them I'm right and you're wrong. My goal was to have them walk away with lots of questions,
yeah,
skeptical. And so that the next time one of those, postmodern or post-liberal people come at them and say, this is the reason why, they go, how do you know?
yeah. Show
And
me.
and
Yeah.
really, show me, how do you know, and so forth. And that you can start parents at a very young
Yes,
age.
absolutely.
You should. I will go so
Good.
far as to say you must.
Yeah, you must. Well, like, it was just par for course in the colonial days that
Yeah.
they thought that it's not that. I mean, don't get me wrong. They knew they were, in a lot of ways, they were battling what Brett Weinstein calls a Cartesian crisis, right? Because this was people don't understand. The Constitution is arranged the way it is to mitigate exactly what we're going through right now. The same thing. They knew it. They actually knew what they were dealing with.
That's right.
There's actually lots of conversations of James Wilson in particular talking about how he spent 20 years trying to get this thing called Blackstone, was based. It's Cartesian skepticism. It's subjectivism is what it is.
Right.
It had permeated British common law, and he was like, "Nope, we need to get that out of here. Get it out." Right. And so
Yep.
the Constitution is actually this. So this is not nothing new. This is actually all over.
Well, it's
But
also why they don't
yeah,
teach it to our children.
absolutely right. Well, and I'm just trying to say, just par for course over in the colonial. It's the Scots were doing this. The colonialists were doing this. Where they're at their schools, and don't get me wrong, a lot of it was based in religion, right? A lot of Christian seminary type of teaching, but they were talking about objective reality. They were talking about, okay, here's, like, they actually just talked about it, right, to their kids, right? And it was part of the education. Philosophy was part of classical education back in the day, even for kids. It wasn't a college thing. It was much younger than that. That you were supposed to have some level, especially if you were landowner or whatever, right? Some kind of bare minimum education, right? which was, of course, the Enlightenment was kind of on fire at the time, right? But not just math, not just science, not just religion, but philosophy, right? And just talking about the world. You should have some kind of understanding of it, right? And so we just kind of
Yeah, exactly.
get back to it.
We absolutely must. And I'm really grateful that you came here to like help me explain this. I do try to explain this best I can, but I think you did a much better job
Yeah,
of
it gets heady. I'm pretty bad at using big giant words that I just learned 2
well,
years
so I
ago.
was like, I hope nobody feels insulted. No, for
Yeah.
real. I hope nobody watching this feels insulted and says, I can't believe you put metaphysics and epistemology across the board at the bottom. Like, believe it or not, there are plenty of people who don't automatically know the definition of the words. They may have known at one point in time and they forgot, or they may just genuinely not know because we're all products of the same
Yeah.
system. And a lot of this stuff, believe it or not, as immersed as I was in American history and all, I didn't learn philosophy. I didn't learn philosophy until after college and even after grad school when I went looking because I wanted to know, why are the people in my grad school insane?
Yeah.
And like, why am I in a school system that wants me to do things that make no sense? And then when I started looking, that's when even I discovered this stuff. I didn't really even discover, I read Fountainhead, but I didn't discover Ayn Rand until I was well into my late 20s. So it is not that far fetched to think there are people out there for whom this is new. And that's okay. You're not expected to know everything, but it
Yeah.
is important for you to know now. Like it's
Yeah.
really important.
It's funny, right? Because the reason those words are all fancified is because they encapsulate a complex topic, right? So the word metaphysics just means the study of existence, really, or ontology,
All it
right?
is.
That's all it is. And I know it's a fancy word, but when you just realize, oh, okay, that's what that means, right? Like, or epistemology just means how do you know what you know? That's it. That's really, there's nothing more to
That's
it
it.
than that, right? And you don't have, you actually, epistemologically speaking, you don't need to know anything deeper than that it means for it to be
That's it.
useful to you, right?
Well, and as an
Yeah.
educator and working with parents, I would say parents, what you need to know is that your kids from middle school onward, and especially in college, may well be going from room to room
Yeah,
within a day, encountering different epistemological viewpoints
that's right.
for hour to hour. Do you
Yeah,
have any idea how destabilizing that is to the human
yeah,
brain?
yeah, right.
I mean, you got one professor that's telling you how you know what you know is because some reason they give you, and another one who's giving you a multiple choice test where you had to memorize 500 facts.
Yeah.
And you're
Oh,
like,
dude, that's a good point. Yeah, because if you go to biology or science or chemistry or science, that's based on objective reality. Your brain looks at that completely different than when you go into, human
that's right.
science. Science.
Right. And it used to
Yeah.
be in a
Yeah.
classically liberal education, sort of pedagogy and praxis, it would all be with objective. Now, that doesn't mean when you do, English literature, everything, some of it's subjective, analysis is subjective, but
Yeah.
the analysis is only legit if you can make your case with examples, textual evidence. You don't get to write a paper that talks about the sexual hierarchies of dogs at the dog park. I mean, that like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian and so forth did, because you still are held to that fundamental standard and limiting principles of, even when you're analyzing subjectively, you need to make a case. Okay. It's not just because I said so. I perceive it that way. Therefore, it is. And so, no matter what class you would go to, you always had that basic. So, you can go into biology and they go, show me. Or you go into geometry and it's like, where's your proof? And all that. This is the standard. As
Yeah.
a student, I know what's expected of me. It's different knowledge sets, it's different data, but I'm looking at it. My brain is functioning when I encounter this stuff using the same way of thinking. Trying to change your brain from one way of thinking to another way of thinking, from hour to hour, day to day, year to year.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance is incredible, right? And then, so for example, people reading Tolkien, right, who is writing a story based on our metaphysics, on our belief in objective reality, even if it's a fantastical story, like a postmodernist reads that thing completely different, like
Totally.
totally different. They don't look at Tolkien the same way. They do not come out with the same things he was trying to get across to you, right? And so that's the problem you're running into. So now so now what do you do if you go to a postmodern class or whatever, English lit class full of your this postmodernism, and then now you go to chemistry, you're like, oh my god.
Well, and this is what no, we're actually seeing it. It's
Yeah,
invading the
yeah,
sciences,
yeah.
and you see people within the sciences like chemistry and biology and so on, and even in medical school, who
Oh,
are
dude, medical school for
trying
sure.
to
Yeah,
force these disciplines to be subjective to accommodate the way these brains, because let me tell you something, if your brain has not been trained to think logically and rationally, that is a skill. You have
yeah.
your prefrontal cortex, and it is capable. The human being is fully capable of being all the way till, I mean, we're not all capable of being Isaac Newton, but I mean, the fact that an Isaac Newton could exist tells you what the human brain is capable of. If you don't develop that, if instead you are really just a slightly higher order animal reacting to stimuli, okay, and then you go into a discipline like science, it is excruciatingly difficult
Right, which is why they
to.
try and tear it down.
So they're making
Yeah.
it easier. This is why they're making math easier, because they quite literally can't get the kids to get it. So they're putting the burden on the discipline to change, to adapt to the kids. And y'all, we don't want to see what the world looks like in 50 years
Well,
if they keep doing that, because
you
we
might as
actually
well
do need people who know stuff.
have a flat earth. A flat earthers are gonna be building your bridges at that point,
Well, and
right?
people will say, well, the AI will do it. And they're not entirely wrong. But I'll tell you
They're
what,
built That's built by people with the
they're
same.
built by
Yeah.
humans, but here's what you'll always need. You'll always need human beings, not only to program the AI and to feed the AI. We're going to run out of human produced knowledge to feed the AI. It's very hungry. It needs to eat.
Yeah.
And we're going to run out of that, and we're not going to make any new knowledge. And there's only so much the AI can make that is brand spanking novel and new.
Well, that's a
There,
good point.
they really can't. So you're going to need people to come up with new knowledge, right? That's what scientists used to do, and or at least check the knowledge we have and make sure there's not something we're missing. And then you need humans to ask the AI the best questions. So what good is the AI if the person is always putting in prompts like, hey, draw me a cat that looks like Kamala Harris? Like, you needed to ask questions that are worth answering.
Yeah.
And that takes a human who actually cares about human life, because that's what we're trying to sustain here. We're not just building a world of machines. We don't really want to live in the matrix, do we?
Mhm.
And so I'll tell people, like, yes, AI is going to do a lot of the things that your middle manager, people pushers were going to do, but your kid, or I hope it's your kid, because otherwise your kid is going to be like, what, shoveling coal, like, something a machine can't easily, I don't know, some machine can't do. Your kid is not going to be able to distinguish him or herself if they are not smarter
Or
in terms
yeah,
of creativity
yeah, yeah.
than the AI. And in order to do that, you do have to have a knowledge base, honey. You don't
Yep.
get to just do that without knowing some things and
That's
being
it.
able to think. And so this whole idea of they don't need to know it because the computers are going to know it. And how are they going to know if the computer's right? So when the computers they say, how do I get across the raging river? I've come to a raging river. I don't know how to get across it. How do I do that? Well, if you don't know to say the raging river is approximately this far across, and I judge that there are about 17 really giant rocks in the middle of it, and it's probably traveling at this miles per hour, and the current is going blah blah blah. If you can't eyeball that and kind of come up with some of the relevant points of that you might need to feed into the AI, it might give you information that's totally useless. If it's super duper smart, and we haven't gotten quite there yet, it will fire back questions at you
Yeah.
like the ones I just asked you. But
Yeah.
again, a human has to have put that information in to start with, and we're not there yet. AI is
Not
not
yet.
there yet.
No, it's got a while. Oh, well, we'll probably get there soon.
It answers the question you asked it to the
Yeah,
best of
well,
its
I've
ability.
even argued with it on occasion because if I ask it, for example, if I ask it about Plato or something like that, it makes kind of weird assumptions that I'm a believer in Plato. I was like, no. I'm actually asking you clinically about Plato. I'm actually not saying that I'm a believer in him or
Right.
not. So your conversation is skewed because it keeps answering every time you ask it. It's thinking that you're you're Platonian or Platonic or whatever, right? Like they think that you think that way.
And
So
you know that it's doing
yeah,
that
you have to
because
tell it
you can
to cut it
read.
out. Yeah, because you have to tell it to cut it out. Well, it takes a minute, right? As you're reading the answers, it's like, wait a second, right? Then you have to tell it, don't do that. You can't.
Right. But
Right.
we have students today who can't recognize
Right. Exactly
opinion
right.
from
Yeah.
fact, and they
Exactly.
don't know the difference between propaganda and opinion.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying that, still knowledge is at the core of all of it.
Yep.
Without that, they're not gonna be able to do any of this. So you and I could probably talk like
Yeah.
all
Probably
day
forever.
about this. And I have used up so much of your valuable time, and I'm so grateful. But anyway, audience, I hope this has been helpful for you to understand like what we're up against and at its root, flat earthers essentially, and why you need to understand it so that you can fight it and or navigate around it to the extent that you have to. So thank you very much to my guest. And where can people find you at classic_liberal on X?
Yeah. On
And
X, yeah.
where else do you have
No, that's
YouTube?
it. X. I
That's
don't have
it.
a YouTube channel yet. I'm working on it, so I will
Okay.
looking to get some content out there here in the next couple
Yes.
months. So
Awesome. All right. So thank you very much. And thanks to everybody. Please like, share. And if you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help. Please comment down below if you have questions, comments, etc. Also feeds the algorithm. Those are all the little things you can do to help me continue to produce this content. So thank you very much. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks.